Thank you for coming, guys. Welcome to our pre-con, which is the pre-conference to ControlsCon and our smartbuildingdesign.com website launch. This is where we do the slow clap. Come on. Wake up. Come on. Come on. Let's go over a couple housekeeping items. To both sides of bathrooms, right outside in the lobby, there's two restrooms. I'd like to ask that you guys turn your phones off or put them on mute. And I left a business card in everyone's chair. On the back of that business card is a QR code for our website, Cochrane Supplies website, and our smartbuildingdesign.com website. Okay? Now, if we were in the 8th grade, I would tell everyone to pull out their phones and scan it now. But since we're not, I'll ask you not to throw away the card, and please take a look at the website. We're going to go through the website briefly. Thank you. We're going to briefly go through the website and let you guys see what our philosophy was as far as building the website and what type of content we have on that website. And we're always willing to take suggestions, right? We're a smaller company, Cochrane Supply, and we're trying to get as far reach as we possibly can when it comes to serving end users, consulting engineers, commissioning agents, whoever, right? So we want to get a long reach. So we put together this website. The agenda for today, I'm going to chat with you guys for about 30 minutes, talk about myself a little bit, my family a little bit. We're going to talk about the website, and we're going to talk about the Real Estate Cyber Consortium. By show of hands, who has ever heard of the Real Estate Cyber Consortium, better known as REC? Okay, so this should be good. We've got 3 or 4 people. Then we're going to bring up Ryan Hewson from Optigo, and we're going to bring up Steve Halicki from Tritium to talk about OT network design and BACnet SC and cybersecurity when it comes to marrying the two. Then we're going to take a brief break for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to talk to Bedrock. Bedrock has a team that they're going to bring in, and they're going to talk to you about their smart building journey, right? And then we're going to end it with AGM, and they're going to talk to you about smart building technology from an MSI's perspective, right? A Master Systems Integrator's perspective. So, my 30-year journey. I know it's hard to believe I've been in this business 30 years, all right? But I've been in this business for about 30 years, started as a consulting engineer. And I show this so that you can understand my perspective when we're up here and we're chatting about smart building technology, when we're chatting about the supply chain, how all the dots connect between the engineers, the end users, the technology itself, the manufacturer. So you guys understand my perspective. I also work for both Carrier and Train, don't shoot me, selling equipment controls and turnkey projects, performance contracts. Did that for a while. Then I was an owner's rep for a large bond program of about $1.3 billion for Detroit Public Schools, refurbishing the schools. That lasted for about 7 years. And I was also the commissioning manager there. And I took the best practices from every commissioning agent that I hired, started my own commissioning firm after the program was over, did that for a handful of years. And during that time, I met Scott Cochrane in the early 2000s. And we, at Detroit Public Schools, Scott approached me with Niagara, right? And back then, it was kind of smoke and mirrors, right? Sorcery. How are you going to take all these disparate systems, put them into one integration platform and show them graphically? And I went to my leadership, we did a few projects, and that's when I first got interested in smart building technology. And later in my career, probably 5 years ago, Scott came to me with an opportunity, said that he wanted me to handle business development for him, and here we are. Not only that, just in January, I was just hired as the executive director for the Real Estate Cyber Consortium. And we'll get to what REC is and how it fits into our ecosystem shortly. Clicker. There you go. Okay, my family. I always like to show my family. This is why I do it. My lovely wife, Natasha, is on the left. We just got married in July. I held her at gunpoint, got her to marry me. So we got married this past July. My daughter is my oldest. She's in Chicago. She works as a marketing professional and social media influencer and actress and all that good stuff. She's like her dad, jack of all trades, master of none, right? Then my oldest son, Desmond, Dez, better known as Dez, football player, was drafted to the Tennessee Titans in the 4th round. Vrabel kicked him around. They didn't throw the ball. Made him block for Derrick Henry, and now he's in Pittsburgh. So now he's a Pittsburgh Steeler. And my baby, the youngest of the family, I know you're like, he's a baby. He plays for Michigan State University. He's also a wide receiver. So that's my family. That's why I do this. That's why I'm still working. And that's my motivation. So, Joe, pull up the website briefly. We're going to flip through this website a little bit. And like I said, we're open to suggestions. We just built this website, and we built it as a place for not only systems integrators, but for end users and engineers to go to find information, right? So Joe's going to pull that up here briefly. I'm going to flip through the website, just to show you guys some things, some dynamic things about it. There we go. Let's get the home page up, Joe. So this is our home page. Scroll down a little bit. And by the way, I came up with that slogan. We don't make the buildings, we make the buildings smarter, right? So this just kind of gives you a little background on the website itself. Let's go to the About Us page, Joe, and why we built the website. Scroll a little bit for me. So here we talk about our team, our internal team. Ooh, there's my mugshot again. Keep scrolling. A little bit of my background there. And then our technology team and some of the things we do and our approach to servicing our customers. Whether you're a systems integrator or a design engineer, we have the capability to help you design projects. So if you're an MSI, you've got a project, and you're interested in laying out, let's just say, an entire OT network, right? We've got all this IP technology going on now, and you want a way to connect all your systems, bring in all that technology. We have the ability to design those systems for you in Visio, hand it off to you, so that eventually those drawings turn into submittal drawings, then they turn into as-builts, right? So this is part of our team, our internal technical team. Let's go to the next link. Let's go to Lunch and Learn series. So we do Lunch and Learns, both myself, my cohort there, Randall. We do Lunch and Learns about products, about technology. If you look here, there's a few here: how to design an OT network, unified approach to smart building technology, and how to specify integration, right? And these are just a few of the Lunch and Learn series we do. Not only do we do them for engineers, when you hear Lunch and Learn, you typically think engineering firms. But we also have done these for, especially the how to design an OT network. I've done several of those presentations for MSIs also, right? So that's some of the things that we're also doing in the marketplace. Go back up, Joe, and let's go to, let's see, best practices. Let's go there. So guide specifications. Here you can find guide specifications on a lot of the products that we rep. Scroll a little bit here for me. So if you stop here, you've got Division 23, Niagara, Vicon, Edge Controller, Phoenix Contact, Yaskawa, Halo, Division 25, Integrated Automation. That's a Niagara specification. Division 25, Integrated Automation, that's Optigo specification. Scroll down a little bit more for me. You've got a Project Haystack specification in there. Go to Division 25, Integrated Automation with OT. Okay, so that one's not uploaded yet. Let's see. Go to the top left, Niagara Division 23. Okay, here you're gonna find a Word file that you can download. If there's any specifications that you guys are interested in and you don't see on the website, we're still in the process of finishing this website, but we wanted to launch it because there's ton of content out there that everyone's asking for. So we're pointing everyone in this direction. If there's something that you don't see, please reach out to me or reach out to someone in our office and we can make sure we get it there for you. Okay, go back to the best practices. System architecture. Now this is a good, really, really good link. Scroll a little bit for me. You're always gonna find a narrative at the top. Now, go to the first one on the left. This is the level of detail that you're gonna see in the drawings. We call these systems integration drawings. This is a concept that I'm pushing out to the consulting engineers so that we can get more and more detail. Stop right there. So we can get more and more detail in the construction documents, right? Typically, when you see a systems integration or a systems architecture drawing coming out of an engineer's office, it doesn't have this level of detail, especially when it comes to the quote unquote front end, right? Where is your integration software being deployed, right? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Network management switches, routers, VPN appliances, firewalls, all that good stuff. We try to show that in one drawing, a systems integration drawing. How many systems integrators do we have in here? Nice. Wouldn't you appreciate this level of detail if you were bidding a plan and spec drawing or a plan and spec project? Would this clarify a lot of things for you? So, I heard another yes. Now, if you say no, I've got 3 guys over there who are in charge of controlling the room, my 3 henchmen. But all jokes aside, this is the level of detail on drawings that we're providing to our customers. And it's not only to give them a drawing, but it's to educate them on how to put together smart building technology. Because now we've got all these IP devices that are being pushed out into our industry, and they need to land somewhere. They all can't land on the owner's IT network, right? Or their built environment. So now there's products out there that have the capability for you to integrate all of your technology onto one IP platform. And if the owner wants to connect to their environment, you can do it in one place, and they can handle the cybersecurity portion of it. Or it can be a standalone air-gapped network where you handle the cybersecurity of that network. And we're going to get into that here briefly when it comes to cybersecurity. Now go back, Joe. Scroll back up for me. Cybersecurity. Scroll up, scroll down a little bit. So we talked about the real estate cyber consortium just a little bit. Can you click is that link live there, Joe? Yeah, the video. Okay, so this is a brief video that kind of talks about our thought as to what you should be considering as an MSI when it comes to securing an OT network, just the basics. And we always look at 4 areas.
The ability to design, deploy, manage, and secure IP networks have become increasingly important in the facilities world. At the forefront of this movement is cybersecurity and how it is applied to the OT space.
That's my British accent.
Multi-tiered holistic
Pretty good, right?
Cybersecurity for OT gives designers, systems integrators, and end users a foundation for ensuring that the data on your network is safe from vulnerabilities. Cybersecurity is not about making your network 100% impenetrable, but if sufficient obstacles are in place to deter a hacker, they will likely look elsewhere for an easier mark. There are 4 main areas that we address in our approach to cybersecurity for OT. Those areas are encrypted data at the device level, managed IP switches, a physical firewall, and a written cybersecurity policy. First, you want to ensure that
So this is what you're going to find on our cybersecurity page. It also talks about the Real Estate Cyber Consortium, better known as REC. So let's go to the next slide here. No, you can kill the video.
Data on your network is encrypted. We recommend using the Niagara framework as the engine for running control.
So that's our website in a nutshell. Like I said, it's still under development. If you guys have any suggestions as to what you'd like to see, if you don't see it on that website, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that we get some of that information on there. So next slide. Yes. So we talked a little bit about the Real Estate Cyber Consortium. Now, those of you, because I see some familiar faces out there, those of you who know me, you're probably saying, okay, Greg, why are you with a cyber organization? Since when did you become an IT professional? Well, the reason that they got me involved is because what the commercial real estate market is trying to do is handle or tackle the OT challenges that they have when it relates to deploying this technology in their built environment. And not only that, but trying to connect the dots between IT and OT. Now, that playbook has been written for IT. That playbook has been written for OT on the industrial side. They're way ahead of the game. But when it comes to just typical commercial real estate, we are light years behind. And the Real Estate Cyber Consortium is making a concerted effort to make sure that we connect those dots. These are some of the end users that are involved, that are members with REC. And if you're interested in becoming a member, please reach out to me and I can get you information on becoming a member. But what they want to do now, as you can see, there are several commercial real estate owners there. Now they want to start bringing in more systems integrators to bring a different perspective, manufacturers, and other end users or facilities providers. We're talking to IFMA right now to try to get them to join REC because they have the same challenges when it comes to OT and figuring out cyber. So as you can see on the right-hand side of this next slide, AGM, who's going to speak today, they're a systems integrator and a new member of REC. They just joined last week. And the reason they joined is because they understand that what we're trying to do with the Real Estate Cyber Consortium is create cyber harmony. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that term. Well, it's a term you're going to hear a lot. And the term was invented a few nights ago, or a few weeks ago, after our annual meeting, and I came home, and I was talking to my wife, and I was talking about an article that I was writing for REC, and cyber harmony just came out of nowhere. And I consider cyber harmony the concerted effort to connect the dots between the IT profession and our ecosystem, which is OT. So when you're talking about that, you're talking about what the commercial real estate owners consider their supply chain. Their supply chain includes engineers, architects, manufacturers of this smart technology that's being deployed in their built environment, commissioning agents. Has anyone ever heard of cyber commissioning? And it's because it's not a thing yet. It's something that's growing behind the scenes, and it's part of that effort to create cyber harmony. So everyone on that supply chain, including everyone in this room, should have some type of cyber awareness, because it's not important until it becomes important, when there's a breach. When you see a breach, or there ends up being a breach, then all of a sudden you're dragged into litigation, because at the end of the day, everyone involved in that project is going to be part of a lawsuit if there's a major breach because of cybersecurity. And I've sat in several of those meetings. I've been a part of a bunch of conversations. I've sat in some rooms. And while they're talking about risk frameworks, network management tools, threat intelligence, and all this stuff that revolves around IT, one of the main topics that always comes up is cyber for OT. And what does the OT ecosystem understand about cyber? How aware are the manufacturers when it comes to cyber? We know that BACnet has pushed the initiative to get BACnet Secure Connect out there, right? BACnet SC. Stephen is going to talk about that today. That's one of the steps. Like I said, Ryan from Optigo is going to talk to you guys about designing secure OT networks. They've designed a very secure solution, so that's another step. But it's going to require everyone in our ecosystem to get together and understand that cyber is important. We need to create best practices. We need to create processes like commissioning processes and things like that that include pen testing in the owner's built environment. But one of the things that I've done while at Real Estate Cyber Consortium is I've challenged them to actually look into their own organizations and understand what their part is, right? We all know what an OPR is, right? Owner's Project Requirements. OPRs typically go to the consulting engineer to make sure that some of the major requirements that the owner would like to see in their project ends up in the specification, which in turn ends up being part of the contract documents, right? That means that someone owes it. And if it's in the contract documents, then it's trackable by a commissioning agent, right? So what I've challenged the end users is to develop operational technology governance teams within their own organizations. Bring on professionals who understand OT, right? Bring in professionals that understand their built environment and start creating these owners' project requirements that in turn can go to the engineers, which in turn ends up in your laps if you're an MSI, right? Which means you'll have to raise your level of competency when it comes to deploying this technology on the owner's network. So these are some of the things that we're dealing with right now. We're working with CSI a little to try to make sure that Division 25 is well-rounded, Division 27 is well-rounded. There's a ton of specifications out there, right? Floating all over the place. I think Tritium has put together a Division 25, Optigo has put together a Division 25, I've put together a Division 25, several engineering firms have put together a Division 25, but there's no consistency as to what it should actually look like. And what I feel is that REC is at the forefront of bringing all of the supply chain together and bring all of those thought leaders together and put them in one room to put out these best practices. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Great. So that's who the Real Estate Cyber Consortium is. And like I said, if you guys want any information, just let me know. I can get you involved and get you signed up. So let's bring up our first panelist, and we're going to talk a little bit about OT networks. We're going to talk a little bit about BACnet Secure Connect, and let you guys dive into exactly what we're doing out there to solve some of those issues when it comes to the emerging IP technology and all this smart building stuff that everyone's clueless about, right? So one thing I like to say, we don't want to wait till the very end for questions. I like to make this interactive, so if you have a question in the middle of the presentation, please let us know. We'll get a mic runner to run you a mic because we want to make sure that no one gets lost along the way. So let's come up here, Ryan and Steve. We've got Ryan Hewson from Optigo, and we've got Steve Halicki from Tritium. And they're going to chat with you guys a little bit about OT networks and BACnet SC. Morning, guys.
Morning.
Have a seat. I moved your chairs up enough so that you don't do a backflip, so you can thank me later.
Appreciate that.
So both of you guys, tell the audience a little bit about yourselves and how you started, where you are, and give us all that good stuff.
Please. All right. Good to meet you, Ryan. You as well. Stephen Halicki. I'm the Director of Products at Tritium. Pleased to be here with everyone today. Got a great, I think, a number of really exciting speaking tracks lined up. I think it's all going to benefit what we do. I know personally, from a Tritium perspective, we really gain just as much from these sessions as probably you do yourselves. So I actually have been with the smart building industry pretty much for my entire career. Started in the mid-2000s working for an A&E firm out of Chicago. And really they were focused primarily just on designing smart buildings, design, build, turnkey, you name it. Also commissioning, retro commissioning, but really they're at the forefront in the 2000s of really moving this forward. And then of course I had the opportunity to specify plenty of buildings or OT systems and then BAS systems based on the NICRA framework. So been with Tritium for about 4 years, and since then it's just been a wild ride, and just great to be here with everybody today.
Great. Yeah, my name's Ryan Houston. I've had quite a long journey, starting with, I started at Delta Controls, right in the manufacturing up in Canada. Went through quite a long career through there, left, went to the field, been in your shoes in many pneumatic cooling towers and all that fun stuff. Felt your pain, got dusty, all that fun stuff. Sat on filter boxes, better than wire boxes, by the way, more comfortable. And then I went back to Delta and had a long career, almost 15 years, as product management. So really started to specify and design products around how they would be used out in the field. And outside of that, I decided to jump ship, move into Optigo, and still based in the building environment, but more around a bit of analytics and the OT networking side. And that's where I still am today. It's been 7 years already.
Nice. So how many of you have heard of Optigo? Okay, nice. So it's not new to anyone in here in the room, but a couple people. And Optigo is an IP technology solution, right? Could you talk a little more about what Optigo actually is, just from a high level? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Optigo started, we looked many years ago and looked around the kind of world and said, everything's going to go IP, right? And 10 years later, we're finally getting there with IP, VAV boxes, and all these different IP technologies that are now being out there in the world. Granted, we were early, but we saw what was coming in the future. And we really wanted to remove the need for garbage networks, right? Things like unmanaged switches, which were very common back in the day and are still quite common today. It's great for connectivity. You really didn't need to do a lot. We only had 10 to 15 devices maybe you had to connect IP. So it made sense at the time. But as you start to grow, now you have a demand on IT, and you have a little bit of argument and some fighting back and forth to try and get IP addresses, trying to get them to understand what you're trying to do, trying to get holes through the firewall, all that sort of thing. And we just skip right through that and say, why don't you just put in a network that you understand all by yourself, right? You've been doing it for years anyways with things like MSTP, where you design and own the network and install it and troubleshoot it. Why can't we carry the same philosophy forward to IP? And that's really the goal that we strive to create.
Nice, nice. So, Ryan, go ahead into your presentation and let's educate them and show them how to actually design one of the systems.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that we want to understand is why we're doing this. And I mentioned a little bit already, but the whole IT versus OT thing, it seems like it's so easy. Why don't we just put 500 VAV boxes on the IT network? And you could try, and it takes a lot of effort to try and do that. And then the second you've done it and you have successful connection, how do you manage it? The only tools you have at your disposal are a couple blinky green LED lights on the actual controller. That's it. That's all you have. You don't get access to tools to understand, is it online? Is it stuck on MAC address filtering? Does it have the right IP address? You have none of that information. So you kind of do all that hard work just to give it off to somebody else to manage who doesn't understand. And in this diagram here, you'll see that there's the IT side, which is everything at the top coming down to the left. What we're trying to do here is represent that IT definitely runs the building and OT as a subset within it, right? So when I say that, all of the network design is within something you control, and then we have one point of connection, either back to an internet service provider or back to IT. What does that do for you is whatever changes that IT makes, anyone ever go and reset a server that IT said they haven't turned off or reset, right? Drive 2 hours for a job just to turn it back on. That gets eliminated because it's sitting inside the OT network. Now, you may have a severed internet connection, but your OT system remains operational and untouched, right? And when we look at the different divisions of responsibility here, all of these pieces are with the same occupant, but they're very different. We're looking at satisfaction. On our side of the fence, do the lights work? Are they warm and comfortable? It's not sweating and full of humidity. And on the IT side, they don't care about any of that. They're going, does your internet work? Can you gain access to the office and business systems? So the satisfaction is very, very different between the two. And as we work our way down the list, anything in IT is a very, very varied data set. We have no idea what's going on inside of their internet practice, right? One of the offices that Optico first started in, we were trying to do some remote calls, video conferences. And in the network that we were provided with, there was a World Cup of soccer on. So everybody was sneakily watching the game while trying to work. And it completely destroyed the bandwidth. We could not work that day at all. So scenarios like that, where you have outside influence to affect your main data stream, is a problem. Whereas if you look at our side of the fence, that data is pretty consistent, right? You get up in the morning, the air handlers and schedules turn on, they do their thing. Later at night, they turn off, and it's pretty repetitive day after day. You may get traffic spikes, but that's due to failure, not due to usage. So as you work your way down the list, you've got training, you've got security. IT is very big in cybersecurity, and we have a part to do in OT as well. It's maybe not as big, but everyone has a role to play. And then your actual training, right? IT is training people on how to connect their laptops to printers and different things like that. And we're training on how to use the stat and lights and how occupancy works and that sort of thing. So the bottom line here is, if you have a problem in your office, an occupant has an issue, IT cannot solve any HVAC mechanical issues unless they hire someone on their staff, and vice versa. We in OT cannot solve your internet access problem, right? So no matter what happens here, the division of responsibility is very separate, and it's very hard to bridge them together. There are cases where that technology does converge, but those are much, much bigger sites where they have a dedicated OT person on the IT team and vice versa, but that's a rare circumstance. So this really isolates, or shows and isolates, the division of why IT and OT are necessary. When we look at bringing in an OT network, it's really, when we decided to design it, we wanted it to be focused on systems integrators and facility management. People that are already working with the controllers and understand the algorithms and the loops and everything that goes with it. Well, now we want to give you a managed network in the same philosophy. I'm not going to throw a bunch of command line interface language at you, a bunch of things that you don't understand, that we don't really need to understand. I'm going to give you a select amount of switches, some DIN rail mount that you can stick in the cabinet, some rack mount where we can put in a structured environment, and a whole bunch of ways to connect it between fiber and copper, and a built-in interface that does both commissioning, management, setup, all of it for you. There's an advantage there by having a system like this, because the way we do it, we flip in switches as demand needs. So if you guys say, hey, I want a 48-port switch, okay, we'll put one in. Or I want some switch with higher grade PoE power, okay, we'll add it to our line card. But on the same side, when you look at the software perspective, inside of here, we can train you how to use it in a couple of hours. And that's everyone on your staff, right? So even if you haven't seen the interface in a couple months, you can still work your way through it. Conventionally, if you're using IT-based products, if you're using Juniper networks or Dell networks or HP networks, you're going to have a tech that's proficient in all of them, but he's the guy. He goes on vacation, none of that network serviceable, right? So, and it's also a lot of work to be proficient in all these different network types. Some of the new pieces that we've added over the past couple of years is, how many of you guys build a spreadsheet with IP addresses ahead of time before you get everything installed? Right? That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's definitely prone for error. right? It's prone for error because we're human, we put it in. And it's tough to sometimes adhere to it because the next step out of doing that spreadsheet is to get the information into the controllers. There are some tools out there that you can upload and put it into, or it's logging into the controller and manually entering those 3 addresses, right? IP, subnet, gateway. That's weeks, if not months of work, depending on the size of a site. We've gone and addressed that problem. Did you have a question, Neil?
Yeah, I'm just curious. So do you have that your software there on top of MicroKit?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes, correct.
Is that a specific appliance for MicroKit?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
So we can purchase it through
Yeah, correct. So,
Will router OS kind of still get into it?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Neil brings up a good point. So we've integrated with a company called MikroTik. MikroTik's a pretty common router manufacturer that a lot of people use. They're based out of Latvia. And their routers are powerful. They're pretty small form factor. And the one that we selected to use doesn't break the bank. It's very cost effective for these applications. But the thing that it gives us the most is when you plug in this router into our network, into our system here, it gives you the ability to automatically create VLANs, right? One for HVAC, one for surveillance, one for access control, whatever you need, one for fire. And it handles the IP addressing problem. So what we're going to do is create a VLAN with, I'm not going to do a /22 or /19 or any of those IP address ranges that we don't understand. I'm going to give you a list, 256 IP addresses, 1,024, 65,000, right? You make the choice. How big do you want it to be? And it goes in, it creates that VLAN with that IP address assignment, and it applies it to all the switches connected automatically. So you're not going from switch 1, put in all this information, do it in the right order so you don't lock yourself out, and then do it to the next switch and do it to the next switch and do it to the next switch. Plug and play, switch configuration, and already you've got your IP address assignment. Now what you're going to do, you're going to take all your controllers, set them to DHCP, automatic assignment, and just plug them in. Here's the cool part. As they plug in, they start to populate in this system, right? You know what port they're going to. You just assign the VLAN to the port. And now that you've got all your devices connected, we have one button that goes in and does one-click reserve. What this does is it sets that device to the automatically assigned IP address, okay? So now if you lose power, plug it back in, it gets the same IP address. Now, we still want that spreadsheet. So once we're all connected, I'm going to export the spreadsheet back to you, right? So none of it's manual entry. All of that work takes an hour, right, as opposed to weeks. The labor savings alone is massive with no error, right? And it's these type of time-saving things that we can provide in this type of network. Any questions around that? Excellent.
So what prevents somebody from attaching a different device and automatically getting a DHCP address?
They can, but once you've already set that up, then you're going to lock the port so they can't get anything. By MAC filter, yeah. That's right. So again, once you get the IP reservation, then you can lock it so that no other device can be added. And that's a very good question because when you're looking at daisy chain IP products, because there's a whole bunch that daisy chain all the way down, one port for 25, 30 boxes, we lock all of them to the same port, right? So you can't pop in the ceiling towel and plug in and try and get into the network that way. Is right by the MAC address. Yeah, we lock it directly. So inside of that, when you're looking at a view, such as this one here, this is how the software looks. It gives you the ability to look if it's enabled or turned off, if PoE is running, which VLAN the port is associated with, descriptions. And this is looking at the ports page. So we're looking at all the ports in a singular view. And you can filter and sort and change this as you want, or you can bulk apply. But your setup here is really, really quick, right? And that's the key. And then once you can do some drill down and get more information in here, but you're really manipulating the system in one location. And multiple people can do the same thing. So using this as part of your design to be able to limit mistakes and having a central interface to do it saves you a lot of time in the startup and commissioning process. When we look at a design, we typically want to lay out where the clusters of IP ports are, right? Are they strewn throughout the building? Is there a cluster in like the northeast wing? Is it a stacked riser, depending on the comm closet? Is it an old mall, as an example, that's been retrofitted many times, so the hallways go all different directions? What type of building are we looking at? From there, you can decide what type of topology you want to use. Do we want to use fiber? Do we want to use conventional fiber point to point? Do we want to use splitting PON fiber? Do we want to use Cat5 or Cat6? All of these questions, the network can be flexible on whichever one you want, but we're talking about brand new construction. We're talking about fiber for future growth. We want to discuss, is it retrofit? And the guy's just going to sell the building, so we don't really care anyways, right? Slap in a network and move on. There's a lot of different ways that we can answer those questions, and the network can perform equally well in every scenario. And in each one of those, you can always upgrade later if you determine it's necessary. This example here, we call the spectra, which is splitting fiber. It's pretty cool where we can take single line of fiber, single strand for that matter, and split it to go different directions, right? So if you just want an OT network, think of a building such as this one, we could do the entire building, switch per floor, in 2 strands of fiber. Or do you want to pull the 12 strand and have 10 strands ready for future proof? Right, so there's a lot of different flexibility that exists in these type of networks. And in every case, you'll see it there on the top left. Greg puts this in his drawings quite a bit. We've got that IT connection or internet connection going to the router. That is our single point of connection. So think about it from IT's perspective. They're not trying to monitor and secure 5 or 1,000 ports of connection. They're securing one, our connection to IT. That's it. So they can wrap it with all their cybersecurity pieces that they want to do, have their firewall rules coming in and out of our network, and then the rest is up to us. But we're wrapped in their bubble as well. We're going to do our part. We're going to add the controllers, lock the controllers, make sure no one can have brute access to the system, and then they can do their part. And that's where it makes the two work very, very well together. All right. So I show these 3 towers as an example of how you can lay in networks. The ideal network, the one that's easiest for all of us to install, is on the left. It's a switch per floor, stacked riser. You run your cables. You can pre-build a box, stick it in, stick it in, stick it in. Very fast to install, hardly any labor and equipment, but could be costly. So for those of you that specify, that's what we start with. That's the golden one. And then they go, well, it's a bit too expensive. We don't really want to do it that way. Okay, well, let's drop down to a switch per every 3 floors, right? Maybe you don't need as many ports. We only need 4 or 6 ports. So we can start to have the same OT network design and just spread it out a little bit. You trade off a little bit of labor, but it's not too much of a problem. Then we get to the one on the right where we do a little bit bigger of a switch, and then we do it every 3 floors. And you can expand that every 4 floors, every 5 floors. But remember, you're trading off labor to run to each switch and connect it, right? Or you're running a bit more Cat5 and Cat6 than you normally would. You're putting some on the floor above you and some on the floor below you. But those are all the options that are on the table. We all know we get value engineered, so start with the left, end up on the right, everybody still wins. So in these type of networks, the converged site and the network visibility is everything, right? You can see if the device is online. If your front-end aggregate system has an X on the controller because it went offline, why? Power, network, controller. Well, I can eliminate the network problem for you. Now we know. So now you can send out the electrician with different parts, right? You've got network ownership. You own the network. You're not at the mercy of anybody else, right? And your entire company can own that network. It's easy to service. Do it remotely, or all your staff knows how to do it. We look at simplified integration. Guess what? This OT network goes in first, not after, not when building's rated for occupancy, first. And the second it goes in, you're bringing in all your devices, you're connecting them, you're doing graphics, integrating, commissioning, everything as soon as possible, as soon as the construction schedule allows you. If you've ever dealt with IT, the building has to be rated to be clean and occupied before we start putting in a network. How much does that cost putting in a temporary network until they get their full network in? Time, very painful. And you've got an upsell potential. Now that you've got this network in there and you put in a basic VAV job, what else can you sell them? What other services are available? Surveillance, fire monitoring, access control. You've already got the network in. That part's easy. It's a lot of upsell potential through the life of that building. We want to make sure it's future ready. So take a look at fiber. Fiber is huge. Right now we're running, I know 10, 40 gigs per second, a bit more. The wire itself is good for 25 terahertz, right? We'll never, ever, ever have to pull the fiber out of the building, right? Ethernet's just about, or is at max. Can't get any more speed out of it. I mean, you could say, do we need it for HVAC? Well, we're going to get past it pretty quick. And then your faster commissioning. Just because all the devices are there on your network, ready to go, you can commission it the second it's plugged in, right? You're not waiting. Huge labor savings. That's the end of my section. Any questions?
Let's get him the microphone so everyone can hear. Thank you, Rhonda.
Okay, hear my voice on this. Thanks, guys. So I think I just wanted to add to what I found beneficial for laying out these networks. If the more ahead of time that you can plan these things out, obviously it's best. But what I found working with you, Ryan, in the past, I know it's been a few years, but you know, we as you go through some of these exercises, so if you're laying a network out kind of conventionally, or if you started laying it out with, I'll say, with IP stuff, some of the questions that come out is, well, what do you need as the medium? So is it a Cat6 or is it fiber? And then sort of like, well, why does that matter? I'm just plugging in like internet stuff, you know, for the layperson. But it you know, if you fast forward, it's like the questions that you're asking now will get your mind moving in that direction, right? So you start thinking about, well, what does a cyber incident look like? And then also like, well, what other systems are we putting on here? And then you might architect a network and find that maybe even the appliances that you're trying to push all that information through, like it's like a JSON will hang up if you,
Right.
and then it doesn't meet the hardware requirements. But I guess my point is, what I'm saying is, like, understand that this is an enabler for a lot of information flow for stuff that you don't know that you're going to be putting on, or people are going to be asking you putting on. So if you lay it out kind of a way that you think you do it, you're going to lay it out, and then if you cost it out both on the capital project side and on the operations side, and then you compare it to like an Optigo solution, then you're really going to see for yourself what the value add is, has been my experience anyways, right? And then understanding what is if somebody were to run fiber, you know, I think you guys have, I'm pumping your tires, by the way, but if you run like just one single strand, and then you could split that strand with what you guys have there, it's hugely beneficial. But these are kind of like removed from your thinking, and I guess on the website, if we're welcome some feedback, it's like,
Yeah.
I think some, you know, like a white paper or some education, and like to dumb it down and be like, who are the personas in a building that would care about something like this, and when would they care about it?
So in other words, the stakeholders and
Yeah.
the business case to those stakeholders
Yeah.
that can help you make that decision.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because sometimes, like, I'll say, it's typical scenario, somebody's bidding on a project, you don't know, it's such a short timeline, and you don't really know who cares just yet. But depending on how far ahead of it, like all of the stuff that you can communicate out that talks to this is going to save the money on the building, and it's going to limit their risk once it goes up. But some sort of if you paint that picture for regular people, I think it'll help a lot, and then I think it'll help put in the infrastructure and make sure that because I've seen it where campuses like big university will put in, and then they connect everything, right?
Right.
And then the whole building's like hanging up every day, and then there's all these alarms, and nobody's like, what the hell am I supposed to do with all this traffic, right? And it's a mess, and it's like, well, it sounded like a good idea at the time, but we didn't ask why. Like, why are we doing this, right? And then that's where the visibility and what information do we actually need, and how can that help either limit our risk or make the building more money. So anyways, that's why I just wanted to add that. But
Yeah, no, that's very, very good feedback. And what we found, you're going to find some customers like a Ford, like a GM, some of the larger real estate owners, and what we like to call enterprise customers sometimes, they've got their IT, OT convergence figured out. You'd never convince them to come in with a product like an Optigo and install another network because they have their governance plan in place for cyber, and they have their segmented networks. They know how to manage them, and they do a very good job at it. That's not for this customer. But moving forward, what we're doing is telling consulting engineers, if you're going to start specifying IP technology, which if you're an engineer, you should be doing anyway, then you have to specify a network for that technology to land on. You can't just arbitrarily ask a vendor, hey, give me your IP spec for your controllers for air handling units, VAV boxes, and so forth. Because I've seen a specification out there like that, where you can tell that the engineer merely asked his rep to give him an IP spec, which just included the controllers. And then all the rest of the information in the specification was BACnet MSTP, right? So you get the wrong contractor or the wrong integrator who's bidding on his job, he's licking his chops because he knows there's a huge ad coming for networking these devices. They can't just float out in the atmosphere, right? So what we're trying to do is educate the masses on how all this stuff interconnects. And that was through that systems integration drawing that I just showed you. And like you said, presenting business cases to owners and MSIs to understand that IP technology is a lot quicker to program and commission and get off the job. It's just a fact. We work with several contractors who do nothing but IP controls now because they've become so adept at setting up their own networks. You can set up your own servers, temporary servers, depending on how it's being deployed. But you can get off the job a lot quicker when you have your own network. And everyone in this room should know that he who owns the network owns the customer, right? Am I mistaken there?
Oh, that's correct.
He who owns the network owns the customer. I had a project with a large integrator who's part of a mechanical contracting firm. He came to me with a huge job. He said, hey, Greg, remember that Optigo stuff you showed me 2 years ago? I think I got a project for it. And it's a huge project here in town. The owner happened to be a municipality. They didn't want anything on the network. And he had to divide the project up between himself and one of the larger controls manufacturers out there, right? One of the local offices. And I told him, after I looked at the drawings, and the drawings were probably 75% complete. You could tell that it was an engineer out of Texas. They got the feedback from the owner that nothing can land on their IT network. And they made an attempt at putting together a set of construction documents. Well, when I laid my eyes on it, I immediately understood what their intent was, but that's me. And that's not the contractors, and that's not the people who are pricing the job. And what I told the integrator was, listen, give me the drawings. It was 4 buildings. Give me the drawings. I'm gonna lay out the entire project for you. Now, mind you, they hadn't got the project yet. I said, I'm gonna lay out the project for you. And he goes, why do you wanna lay out the project? I go, well, first of all, We can't bid this job from these documents. Cochrane Supply, we can't bid this job from these documents. They're too incomplete. But I understand what they're trying to do. So I'm going to lay out the entire project all the way down to the wireless access points, which happen not to be in there, and the server, all that good stuff. I'm going to lay this entire project out. I'm going to give it to you. You're going to walk in your post-bid meeting with these drawings. Now, I come from a consulting engineering background. I ran my own firm for years, and I know good and well that if I laid out a job and I knew it was incomplete because I didn't understand the technology, and I was part of the post-bid process and the evaluation process, and someone wrote in with that level of detail with drawings, I would sit there and go, wow, they've got it figured out. They've done it before. I can take these submittal drawings. I can educate my staff on how to lay this stuff out. And this is what it actually should look like. Lay the job out. Make a long story short, they got the project. They split it up with that local office that I told you about. I won't name the office, but they split it. But I told them, listen, you take the network, all the fiber, and that's another thing. With me laying out the project, it gave them an opportunity to go to a structured cabling company and get a number for the fiber. There was no way to do that from the engineer's drawings. And I said, if you take the network, all the switches, the server, the network management stuff, the routers, the firewalls, you take all that stuff and you take the large IP air handling units for smoke control, you give them all the VAV boxes, all the air handling units, you give them all that commodity stuff because he who owns the network owns the customer. And successful job, they installed it. Now they're known within their own organization as a top-notch master systems integrator just from that exercise. And they had saw this product 2 years prior to this project coming out. So I'm saying all that to say that when it comes to helping you guys lay out this stuff, we're superheroes. We can actually help you get through it. I've got a process in place. We can walk you through it. I work with Ryan, and Ryan holds your hand. No promises, but Ryan holds your hand through the entire process, all the way through as-built drawings. So we don't do it in a vacuum. We lean on our manufacturer a bit, but it ends up being a very, very good process. And after it's done once, I never have a customer call me back more than twice to lay those projects out because they figure it out after the first time, and I give you the drawings in Visio. So Ryan, thanks a lot. Appreciate your input. Okay, now we're going to jump into the second part, which is BACnet SC. Steve Holicki is going to talk to you about it. I've seen some of his presentation before. This guy is really, really good at what he does. So this kind of ties back to our secure OT network and BACnet SC's part in doing that.
Thanks,
Right,
Greg.
yeah.
Yeah, great segue. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide a preliminary introduction on BACnet. I think some of us know what BACnet is at the end of the day, but I think it's just good to level set at the end of the day. So BACnet, of course, another acronym, Building Automation Control Network, communication protocol that was developed by ASHRAE in the 90s. Now, of course, it was developed to address what was otherwise a shortcoming of buildings at that time where, as Greg mentioned, you had siloed operations, you had your HVAC, lighting, access control systems really not working together harmoniously. And so, of course, Echelon came out with Lawn to address that issue, just to come up with a standard protocol that all vendors could all rally around and speak over. Because at that time, you just had Honeywell's version, you had Siemens version, you had Schneider's version, whatever flavor, they had their own proprietary protocol that you had to utilize with their products. And so BACnet solved that. And of course, it's recognized as an international and an ANSI standard and offers a number of configuration options. You've got BACnet MSTP, which of course is a serial-based protocol. You've got BACnet over Ethernet, which is less deployed, of course. And that's going to be BACnet over Ethernet comms, and then BACnet over IP, which is probably the most commonly deployed. Now, of course, with BACnet over IP, we'll get into that. But by virtue of it being over IP, it presents a number of concerns. And I think one thing that we want you to walk away from this presentation is that BACnet does not replace the need for specifying what an end user wants or needs. It's just providing some standard functionality and tools to enable interoperability. So it's not the be all and end all, but at the same time, look at that industry adoption. So in 2018, you see that BACnet had about 63% of market share. Now this is as specified. So this does come from BACnet International. And you see 17% proprietary protocols and then 20%, which is primarily comprised of LAN OPC UA. 4 years later, look where we're at. 78%. It's growing. And what's primarily being deployed, of course, as part of that 78% market share is going to be over IP or over MSTP. But you can imagine that given the cybersecurity landscape today, there's plenty of reasons why I might not want to deploy BACnet over IP. And in fact, this is a very important note, is that in some of our conversations with big end users, specifically telecom providers, there's one in particular that went through the lengths of despecifying BACnet over IP. So they went through the process of getting Division 23 updated to include BACnet over IP, and then they decide that they're going back to serial. Now the reason why is because BACnet over IP is unsecure. It speaks over port 47808, over UDP, and that's an unencrypted connection. If I have access to that network, I can figure out what's going from point A to point B. I can inspect every ounce of that network traffic. Now, you might say, well, why do you care? It's just temperature data at the end of the day, but no. There could be much more that's going across that wire. And as we're seeing cybersecurity threats emerge day by day, it's important for us to harden every inch of our infrastructure, especially within buildings. So BACnet Secure Connect was designed to address that problem. And of course, it covers that shortcoming that BACnet over IP naturally introduced, insofar as it's going to provide encrypted connections or encrypted communications for your BMS networks and devices. So it's all going to communicate over HTTPS, over TLS 1.3, which means that you have to deal with certificates, which we all know and love, right? And I think another important thing to note about this is that you can deploy a BACnet Secure Connect system and have serial-based endpoints all within your network. And so they really designed this, I would say, in kind of a forward-looking perspective, because they understood that building owners are not going to have the capital expense really to be able to rip out every COM bus that they have within their facilities. And so BACnet Secure Connect really does provide you with that flexibility as you migrate over time. And then, as I mentioned, it's addressing some of those critical security concerns that BACnet over IP has. It's going to use a domain name system to avoid static IPs. That is a challenge. So I think Ryan's really provided a unique perspective insofar as the way that IT professionals, the way the IT departments can interact with what we do on a day-to-day. And so not having those static IPs are a huge win in that regard. And so you don't need UDP, so that whole 47808, you don't need to poke open that hole in the firewall. Leave it closed. And then Secure Connect also addresses some of the just general shortcomings with standing up a BACnet IP-based system. That BBMD, or that BACnet broadcast management device configuration, is one that is commonly misunderstood. And it does contribute to broadcast storms, which will reduce the quality of your network connection. So what does it look like? Well, first, it's got that hybrid implementation support. So you can actually stand up a Secure Connect implementation alongside your legacy BACnet systems. And it does have built-in failover design. Now, that's not redundancy, that's not high availability, but it does give you the capability whereby I lose connection with my primary hub, I can immediately get switched over to the failover. Now, you might say, what the hell is a primary and failover hub? Good question. Down here at the bottom, we have a nice little architecture. And BACnet Secure Connect is kind of designed, think of like a hub and spoke. Your standard wheels, right? So you know what your hub is. It's at center point. It's distributing, or really it's taking all of the load from the endpoints, from the spokes. And the hub is acting in that same fashion. It's directing communication from the various nodes.
So Steve, that hub is software?
Yes, yes, it is software. And I'll get into exactly what that looks like in Niagara, just for everyone's perspective. But yeah, exactly. What I'm showing down there actually is a Niagara supervisor, acting as that primary hub. Now, you can also use a Jace. I'll get into that here in a second, but that's kind of give you kind of a overview of exactly what that hub and spoke architecture looks like. And since Greg queued it up, you can use a supervisor as a hub. You can use a Jace as a hub. And you can also use one of those powered by Niagara devices as a hub as well. So if you haven't gotten a chance to see what they look like, well, it's your favorite manufacturer, more likely than not, has taken the Niagara framework and they have it running on their platform. And so in many cases, you can use that as well. And of course, we have our Edge 10, which can be used as a node. Now, important thing to note, what is a node? It could be a device thermostat. It could be a workstation. It could be a controller. It could also be a router. And that's where that hybrid functionality really comes in. That's where I can take, for example, as I mentioned, you see that I'm routing MSTP traffic to the Secure Connect and then allowing, well, that hybrid architecture just to start flying. So one thing to note is that one hub's required, always. You don't always have to have the failover. It's just best practice. And I think, as I mentioned, the nodes are going to be something that is just going to be a growing part of that architecture as Secure Connect gains adoption over time. But I think for the short term, you're going to just see, for example, a hub and then a node, which more likely than not is just going to be routing traffic from either an MSTP-based or an IP-based system. All right, so from a software stack perspective, if you had an opportunity to look at the BACnet network within the Niagara framework, this is kind of give you an overview of exactly what's in there. So up there at the top, the application layer, that's where all your views are. That's your management views. It's where you're going to be setting, of course, your data links. And then as you peel the onion, you get down to, of course, the WebSockets now, right? We're communicating over TLS 1.3. This is all HTTPS-based traffic. So it's important to note that's where you're going to be setting your operational certs. And so at various points within this layered architecture, you're going to be setting up or establishing your certificates. And of course, that's going to vary depending on whether you are a hub or you are a node. All right. So a couple things. This is very important because if I think about what might impact the adoption of BACnet Secure Connect, it's certificates. Many of us within the building automation industry perhaps came from a mechanical background, and IT principles are something that you more or less had to learn trial by fire, pretty much. And in those instances, certificates might be one of those things that you just view begrudgingly. You have to do it. And Secure Connect, again, is literally founded upon encrypted communications. Certificates is how you encrypt those communications. So as you are standing up a BACnet Secure Connect system, you're configuring it, turning it over to the customer, one thing we want you to know, do not use a public CA for your site CA. You have to use really just one that the site owns. And so you can't go to a DigiCert, a VeriSign, and say, give me a server cert. No. You want to use one that is going to be owned and managed by that site. So within Niagara, of course, you've got a great opportunity just to generate a server cert. You can use that quickly. Now, when you do, those private keys, do not export them. You protect them. They should never be shared. And that's an important thing, because you do have the option to export a private key. You'll get that option when you are setting up certificates. Don't do it. You want to tightly manage that, of course.
Real quick, Steve, is there anyone in here who doesn't understand what a certificate is? Yeah, can you just give them a 30,000 foot view?
30,000 foot perspective.
Yeah,
Think
please.
about it. The reason why they call it a certificate is it's very similar to like a certificate you would receive after receiving certification from a training authority. So let's say that you go through the paces to get a certified energy manager or CXA like Greg. You're going to receive that certification from an entity, a trusted entity. Now, your trusted entity could be like what I just said, like a DigiCert, a VeriSign. That is a company that's basically saying, you can trust that I can guarantee that this certificate, where really what I do is credible. You can trust that this body and the certification that they give Greg to be a commissioning agent is something you can trust. And in the same way, when the issuer, that's essentially akin to that standard body that would have given the certification. Now, within that, of course, is going to be the name. Who is it issued to? Well, it's Greg. He's the person that can use this. And then every other person, let's say that Greg's got a job he's bidding on, and the owner says, I want to see Greg's credentials. What does he give him? The certificate, his CXA. And that allows that chain of trust. That's what establishes the chain of trust. Now, using those certificates, any data that's going over the web, of course, at least with BACnet Secure Connect, all of that communication is going to be encrypted using some of the keys that are generated as part of that certificate process. So you can think of it as kind of like it gives me authority, and it gives me the capability to say, yes, you can trust this connection. Yes, this should be encrypted. And therefore, everything that goes on should continue, of course, until the certificate is invalid or expires. It's just the same way, right? If I don't have, my certificate expires in 3 years and I'm a commissioning agent, you should expect that I should be renewing it, right? Otherwise, what the hell am I doing bidding on that job? You can think of it the same way. So that's kind of a very 30,000 foot level perspective, but I think that does kind of help, hopefully it helps describe it.
So it gives authority to say that this series of data flow is secure/encrypted.
Yeah, so it's yeah, the keys are what's encrypting the data, but yes, it gives you that essential, that chain of trust that you can rest assured that, of course, that's not going to be compromised and that you can trust what you're seeing. Yep. Another couple things, I know we only got 17 minutes left, so I want to get to the other stuff, but cert generation and signing can all be automated using Niagara Network provisioning tools, so that's going to be a big time saver when it comes to standing up a Secure Connect instance. And even more importantly, a server cert within Niagara is inherently going to be a client cert, so you can use that as both the operational cert, which is what you're going to need when you stand up that hub, and then of course, as you get your nodes get signed, of course, by that CA. You can also use that as the main HTTPS cert, or a web server cert. So a couple things are coming. Now, it's not here yet, but at some point we're going to have a new port standard that's going to basically specify how all of us within the community handle certs. So that's called an addendum CC. Get into it, but it has not been approved yet. But when it does, that's going to provide that interoperability that we all really are seeking to drive. So if I sign a cert, so for example, let's say I have a Souter-based node and I'm using a Niagara hub. If I want to sign a certificate signing request from that node, because remember, you have to have a valid cert and a valid chain of trust in place in order for that BACnet Secure Connect system to operate. What you'd have to do is I could sign that CSR within Niagara, but then to get that cert back into that Souter device, I have to use their tools. And sometimes it's not straightforward. And so Addendum CC, or this network port standard, is really going to address that at the end of the day. And we've also built in some things within the Niagara framework that's going to make this process that much more straightforward. So CSRs, which is a certificate signing request, and what that is let's say the node, of course, is going to say, hey, my certificate's invalid right now, I need a new one. So it's going to issue up the certificate signing request to the site CA, or that certificate authority, and then it can be signed. Now that's all a manual process today, and if you're using a Souter device, as I mentioned, you're going to have to go through that whole process and get it back into that device. But with Niagara, we're actually going to be automatically rotating that for you. So if you've got a node within, let's say you've got a Jace that's operating as a node, maybe an Edge 10. Those CSRs that get generated will be automatically signed by that site CA that you set as part of that hub. And that's going to be a major labor saver. And it's going to resolve many of the headaches that I think some building owners and facility managers are going to run into as they stand up and start to deal with a BACnet Secure Connect system. All right. Yes.
So is this only just BACnet devices that are BACnet SC capable, or can
Yes.
we do this to any device?
It's only BACnet Secure Connect devices.
So none of our old devices we can actually do this with.
Yeah, that's where you'd want to use, for example, a Secure Connect node. So you could use like a Jace, for example, and that's where you'd have your legacy BACnet devices if they were over MSTP or over IP.
Okay.
Yep, good question. You just ask if, what about my legacy devices? Can they start participating in, the certificate sharing? Can they start being a node essentially on a BACnet Secure Connect architecture? And that answer is no.
So Steve, if I'm an end user and I decide that I want to be more cyber secure and make sure that my designers are designing around BACnet SC, where do I find that specification language to pass on to that engineer?
Oh, that's a great question, Greg. Great question. So the BACnet Secure Connect just concept is specified in Protocol Revision 21. Protocol Revision 21 of the BACnet standard. So you can actually get that from, of course, ASHRAE came out with it, but BACnet International has a wealth of information that you can use as a specifying engineer, kind of boilerplate language that you can just go ahead and copy and paste into Div 23.
Say Protocol 21?
Yeah, Protocol Revision 21. Yep.
Okay.
Now 23 is coming too, and so 23, of course, is going to have updates, and BACnet International is always updating the BACnet spec just to keep it up to date. So.
What's that SC hub necessary
So, yeah, that's a great question. So, question is, what is the hub really doing at the end of the day? So think about that hub spoke architecture. So the hub is what's directing communication from node to node. Now, nodes can do direct connections, right? But the whole idea is that if a thermostat and device controller needs to do direct comms, for example, I could do a direct node connection if they are Secure Connect compliant. But if not, that comm has to route through the hub and then goes to that
for?
endpoint.
Otherwise, you can do peer-to-peer still with SC.
Yes, you can. Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Peer-to-peer connections are still allowed, and that's through that direct connections through nodes. Or direct initiating connections. Is what's
Hold on,
called.
let's get the mic for you, Colin, so everyone can hear your question.
So if you're an owner with a fleet of BACnet devices and you're thinking, hey, maybe from here forward, I just want to say all my devices are going to be BACnet SC now. Is the first step required to be having your head-end software be SC, or would you maybe start with saying these field devices on down are SC, and maybe sometime later I might update the head-end to make it all talk correctly? Or
Yeah, that's a
something
great
like that?
question. I would start with the hub. You want to start with the hub, and then you could build out the endpoints, right? Just the same way. I mean, when you would design just like, for example, you're looking at a wheel. You're going to start with the hub, right? And then you'll build out the spokes.
Can you though? Like if for some reason there's a reason the head-end talks to all these other
Y-
proprietary networks and other parts of the.
It depends. You know, I I'd caution you to examine, what could happen if I do this. So trying to do kind of if I implement it this way, what are the possible failures or problems I could run into? And just try to limit your risk in that regard. But I would recommend that you start with the hub. Yeah.
I guess essentially we're just encapsulating and securing that packet of information transfer. BACnet Secure Connect is essentially that, right?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
It's just encrypting the communication. At the end of the day, that's what this is. But encrypting the communication and kind of designing the architecture so that the throughputs are as efficient as you want them to be.
And so what we're suggesting is we're doing that with like a hub spoke. If that's one pathway, then there might be multiple pathways within our network and some of our examples, right?
And so remember, the hub is there in addition to that, because that's your site CA, right? That's where that site CA cert is. And that's that primary, essentially, if we go back to that certificate, that's that thing that's establishing that first point of trust that's, of course, generating the keys for the encryption of that data. So that's another reason. When you're doing direct connections for nodes, you do have to set up your certs a little bit differently than you would if you're just doing a hub to node connection. Aaron.
Yeah, I got a quick question. So if you're setting up keys between, or certs, whatever, keys between nodes and hubs, and the contractor would be responsible for that, I would assume, how is this not a step back to a proprietary system? Because the end user doesn't really have the keys to the system anymore, right? Like you could just take those keys and not share them with the end user.
I would recommend you work with the IT department. I think the IT department has to be engaged. I think just in general, and this is something we'll get into regardless, is that they are a stakeholder in this process at the end of the day. And so any bit of, when you set up that CA, for example, that's something that they should be aware of, right? And in addition to that, as certificates get rotated over time, that's something they need to be aware of as well. So, is that getting us back into this proprietary world? I don't know I wouldn't go that far. I would say if there's anything that represents a threat to this whole interoperability, it's the proliferation of APIs that every manufacturer wants you to start using. If I can think of anything from a protocol perspective that represents a threat to interoperability, it's that everybody wants an API and everybody's got their own flavor of it. And we'll get into that here in a second. I got a few minutes left for this, the rest, and we'll touch on it. But this is great, though. I appreciate everybody's questions. All right, so cybersecurity cloud design. Now, BACnet Secure Connect, believe it or not, was designed. One of the use cases was to have a hub in the cloud. Now, they haven't gone that far as to really recommend that, to specify it in mass. But the thing is that that was one of the use cases that they had in mind when they designed it. Now, why should you care about cybersecurity? I think Greg gave you a number of reasons, but I mean, day by day, we see new ransomware, cybersecurity attacks, whether they be denial of service, whether they be something that's a result of phishing, you name it. People are dealing with it. Now, depending on the nature of the attack, depending on what was impacted, you could be responsible. Now, that's a very important thing to recognize. And so just to give you a couple stats there, I mean, you're seeing municipalities. I mean, Oakland, California still hasn't recovered from the ransomware attack that they had. Their police departments, their public safety, everything, end-to-end, user management, every bit of their data, payroll, all compromised. Pensacola, Florida, they estimated it had about a $500,000 impact on that. As a result of that, and look at New Orleans back in 2019, $5 million just to recover from a cybersecurity attack. And then I got some good stats from Veridify. Just read an email from them actually yesterday. 86% increase in cyber attacks in 2022. This stuff's not going to stop. And that's another reason, Aaron, I think that's why we all need to understand why encryption is so important and why we all just need to come to terms with certificates. Frankly speaking.
Why everyone should join REC.
Yes, and a great. Now, where to begin? Now, how do you even, the cloud represents such this nebulous concept. We hear it talked about all the time, cloud this, cloud, what is it? It's a data center, it's a server running in a data center. But the thing is that it all starts with the customer. If they want to take this journey, if they're ready to start incorporating cloud technologies into their overarching design of their building, that's where it starts. Now, as part of this process, I've got this diagram here because at each point within this circle here, you've got continuous engagement. Now, that's continuous engagement with the owner and the IT department. All stakeholders that participate in creating the smart building need to be continuously engaged. Now, of course, it's going to start with understanding what the customer is seeking to do, reviewing their needs. And that's an end-to-end. That's just an open questionnaire. What are you seeking to do? And of course, you define those problems and then your solution will emerge accordingly. But you need to analyze what they want you to do, investigate the ask. Because sometimes a building owner just wants to do something. They want to do it cheap. They want to do it fast. Now, we all know what happens when we do that. Value engineering rears its ugly head. And next thing you know, you've got an unsecure connection somewhere within your network because, well, they eliminated that. They redlined that one out. Can't. That's why you have to investigate it. And depending on what you're doing, what you're responsible for, you could be on the line if something goes wrong. And then from an implementation, this is the most important. You've investigated the ask, you've analyzed it. Now the next step is to augment with security best practices. And then all throughout, continuously engage with all the stakeholders involved. So we're going to talk about just a couple cloud types as we're getting to the end of this presentation. Because you might say, well, I mean, I don't even know. Cloud is a cloud, right? So you have a private cloud, you've got a hybrid cloud, a public cloud. A private cloud is going to be something that's going to be maintained by the customer. And so if a customer or a building owner is asking you to integrate with them, that's going to be a tightly controlled environment that you most likely are not going to be managing. Now, of course, however, if they're asking you to stand up a private cloud, that's a different topic. But it's not shared. That's customer information is going to be isolated by default because the customer owns it. Now, moving over to the right, or I guess to the left, hybrid cloud is going to be a mix of both a private and a public. And I think most customers that are using hybrid cloud infrastructure today will eventually make the shift to a public cloud over time. Now, a public cloud is going to be maintained by a cloud service provider, such as like your AWS, your Azure, plenty more, GCP. Now, that's going to be shared. Now, that does not mean that customer A has access to customer B's data. It's not the way that it works within a public cloud. All customer information is going to be naturally isolated by virtue of tenancies. And now, as part of how you're going to leverage the cloud, how would I want to use it within my smart building? It's a couple use cases. Now, I'm just grouping these together because, in the interest of time, of course. Now, data lake, that's one we've heard over and over again. I just want it to store data. And once it gets there, I want to run an analytics application. I want to add some visualization components. I want to export it to third-party apps. Either way, I'm trying to transform, understand the data, harness it in a way that I wasn't before. Another use case would just be control. All I'm seeking to do is provide remote access to the site for configuration, re-engineering, management, or end-user access. There's plenty of building owners out there that love to pull out their mobile device and log in and see what's going on in the building. In addition to that, you can also put supervisory logic and services as well. And then you've got the final one to my left, data lake and control. And that's kind of taking all of them together. That's where you have the mass storage of data. But then you also have control. And that's where APIs start to emerge. That's where you're making API calls to certain web services, certain endpoints to be able to drive what's going down at the building level. So I'm going to start with analyze, right? So investigate the customer ask. Is the solution designed secure? This is the most important thing. If you see something, say something. Now you see this everywhere when we go to the airport, train stations, buses, you name it. But this really does apply to what you need to do when you are looking at a design and you are ready to bid on that job. If you see something, you see a weakness within their proposed architecture, within the way that they are seeking to harden their network, raise your hand, say something. And always baseline what you're seeing against any regulatory or deployment requirements. Because depending on what environment you're standing this smart building in the cloud within, you might not be able to do certain things. So think about pharmaceutical, for example. You have CFR, that's really mandating the processing of data, and then of course, how long you keep it. Private versus public cloud, understand your responsibility. Now that really exists just throughout. You've heard that said by Ryan, you've heard that said by Greg as well. Understanding your responsibility as it relates to what you're doing, what you're touching. If you have something to do with it, like with an endpoint of the server, you touch it, you break it, you buy it. Right? So it's very important to be aware of what you're doing and how what you're doing could possibly impact the site. On-prem interaction, a very important thing to note is that we want to ensure distributed control at all times. So if you have a control algorithm running in the cloud, you want to assess the impact on those endpoints. I don't want a supervisory algorithm in the cloud overriding all of my operator overrides. You just don't want to do that. Now, you might want to relinquish those overrides on a day-to-day basis because you know that your technician just loves to override things instead of doing things in a very straightforward or comprehensive manner. It's very important to note that when you do something like start to execute control logic that's going to impact some of your endpoints, understand how it's going to impact the site. Now, deployment technologies. Do they want to use VMs, virtual machines that's, again, going to be in the cloud somewhere? Could it be in the customer's data center? Is it going to be something that's running in Azure, AWS? Understand that. Use of virtual private networks of VPNs. You always want to use those. If you want to have remote connectivity, you want to have remote access to the site, you need to be using a VPN. Now here's where, this is a very important point. This is where your app software integrations come into play. You're going to have plenty of API interactions with whatever's going to be stored in the cloud. So if you're using that data lake, or even the control use case, for example, the customer's probably going to ask, I would like for this web service to interact with this sequence. Now, when they do, it is very important for you to understand, is that cloud service secure? How are the APIs designed? Is it using a token-based authentication, for example? You hope it is. And we'll get into that in a second, but that's a very important thing to note. Now, when we get to the implementation perspective, augment with best practices. For network management, if you need outbound connections to like Niagara licensing server, you're going to want to put a proxy server in place. You want to ensure that you trust that connection, it's in your allow list, and it can go through the firewall. And you want to manage those firewall port rules. Don't open up 47808. I'll say it one more time. Don't open up 47808. Don't do it. Use BACnet Secure Connect. Architecture, zero trust by default. This gets to something that's a little bit more comprehensive, but depending on what you are doing within this overarching design, you might be responsible for all of that. And of course, as part of that, enforcing the principle of least privilege. Now, zero trust is to ensure that you don't really, at the end of the day, you don't trust anything. That's exactly what that means, is that you are going to essentially validate every request. And so that means I don't have access to certain services, executables, anything like that. You don't. You only give people access, of course, what they need. And then, of course, the principle of least privilege means I'm getting the least amount of capabilities to do what I need to do. And what that means is that you don't have super users everywhere, right? Everyone is not an admin. And of course, the principle of least privilege is one thing that reinforces that. From a deployment perspective, as I mentioned, use VPNs. Use VPNs. Now, apps that are using even over TLS, they can still be susceptible to denial of service attacks. And so that's still kind of in that whole umbrella term of ransomware, cyber attacks, denial of service or DOS attacks fall into that. This one's big. You heard me say this a couple times. Engagement with IT. keep that engagement going throughout the lifespan of the project. And even after it wraps up, you're in the warranty phase, you should be still engaging with them. Just get a pulse check on these folks every once in a while. And this one's very important. Software lifecycle management. Whatever software is being deployed as part of your solution, ensure that you have access to patches. Ensure that that vendor has committed to you that they're going to patch vulnerabilities in a timely manner, and they'll distribute it accordingly. And then in addition to that, allow the software to be scanned. If there are third-party libraries that comprise that software architecture, you should be scanning them for vulnerabilities. So if it's a Java-based appliance, scan it. Chances are it's probably out of date. And Java updates come every quarter. So it's very important that you stay on top of that. Security bench strength. This is important too for what you do. Bring on team members, train team members so that they have the right skill sets to be able to guide you through some of the security challenges that you will see. And this one's going to be big. You've heard Scott Cochrane say it. We believe it too. Get cyber insurance. If you are currently integrating today in any shape or fashion, you just need to get cyber insurance. You really do. Because if one of those ransomware attacks occur and you are held responsible, that's the only thing that's going to protect your business. Physical security, we heard a couple notes about that, but believe it or not, that has an impact on what you do, even within the cloud too. So just remember that they're all kind of operating together, whether it's in the cloud and it's on-prem, hybrid, they kind of all mesh together to create something that's, of course, unique and one of a kind. And so you want to ensure that you're locking doors when you've got a switch being put into the building, it's in a control cabinet, a locked control cabinet. And then from a guidance perspective, this is just something that, if you're developing applications, you're thinking about creating a cloud application for a building owner, OWASP Top 10, or the Open Web Application Security Project Top 10. It's going to provide you guidelines, best practices for how you should be developing a web application, and more importantly, how you secure it. All right, and
That's great stuff, Steve.
Okay.
And one of the things that we promote at Cochrane, just from a very basic level, when you're talking about designing a secure OT network, is three basic things. Making sure that you have encrypted data, making sure that you have managed switches, and making sure that you have a physical firewall installed, right? What BACnet SC allows you to do now is have that encryption at the device level opposed to at the JACE or just the supervisory level. So Steve, I really appreciate you and Ryan for joining us today. This is where we start the slow clap. We're going to keep the program rolling here. Next up, we've got the Bedrock team. Russ and his team are going to talk to you about their smart building technology journey and how they built their internal OT team within their organization and why they made some of the decisions that they made in regards to smart building technology. And we'll start by you guys introducing yourselves and telling the audience what you do for Bedrock and what your function is. We'll start with you, Russ.
Okay. I'm Russ Holton. I know quite a few of you out there, contractors, a couple of my teams out there. I'm the Director of Building Systems for Bedrock. So my main role is to oversee all the smart building technology. So any new build, any retrofit build, things like that, we work hand in hand with the engineering firms designing our control systems, making sure that we're getting the needs we want. We are always trying to advance to the newest, latest, greatest technology. So we try to vet that stuff out a year or so in advance. So we have it tested in our buildings before we roll it out. Yeah, my role, it's involved in all that and more. So we're also in the design phase, like we have the Monroe blocks coming up over here shortly. So we're already in conversation with the architects, engineering firms for our mechanical and control systems for that, even though it's just a future build here in the next few years. We've already got that one designed out build. We're working to refine it, make sure it's what we want. My team also consists of 5 control engineers that are on staff down here in downtown Detroit. We do our own in-house service of our control systems, program modifications, lighting systems, things like that. So we're a whole in-house team where we we actually take care of the needs of Bedrock without the need for outside contractors. So we're a full house service department as well.
John Guardiola, I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Operations for Bedrock. To Russ's point, my position, we oversee all operations of the building, everything from fixed equipment to integration to tenant concerns are all things that we work with. Russ and I are a team. I mean, it's shoulder to shoulder together. We could not exist without our BMS program. I'm also on the sustainability team, working with Bedrock on ESG, et cetera. And it's interesting that as we started our journey, I've been with Bedrock 10 years, and when we started our journey, it was infancy stage. I think Bedrock's, 12 years old. One of the first things that I asked for when we came in was a BMS, a building management system, a smart system, single pane of glass, so we could see all these buildings that I knew we were going to buy. I think when I started, we had 12 engineers, building engineers, and 11 buildings. Well, here we are with 110 plus. And we knew we had great vision back in the day that if we couldn't see these and control them and be sustainable, we wouldn't be successful. So from there, we've grown. We've grown to buying buildings and gutting them to the walls, rebuilding them with new technology for our sophisticated tenants to move in, to now we're building ground up. You know, you can take a look behind me, look at the Hudson site book, which we're getting ready to flip over. Monroe site, East River, we've got a lot of stuff going on. So when you come ground up, all these experiences that we've had together and lessons learned come into play. To Russ's point, we get involved right at the very beginning with the developers and talk about with our engineering firms, et cetera. We have smart building specs, we have smart mechanical specs from lessons learned and how we want to build it. If you don't build it sustainable and operatable, it's very hard going back after the fact. So we've learned those lessons for the last 10 years. So big part of it is running them day to day. I rely on this entire team for the day-to-day operations of these buildings.
So I'm Jack Shiklina. I am the Director of Information Technology for Bedrock. So every one of our buildings has a network in it. Network and infrastructure, and my team oversees that. We design, we plan, we maintain as well. That way we could have intercommunication, so Russ's controls can have communication out, in and out of the building. All of our buildings are interlinked together. So some of our stakeholders would be, security, Russ's controls, anything we do for event space, parking, all that encompasses into my network, basically. So,
Eddie Dema, I'm one of the co-founders at Code Labs, former Bedrock team member. I feel like I've been a part of Bedrock since the beginning. So, Code Labs, we're a smart building platform. To John's and Russ's point, we are that single pane of glass. Have been working with Bedrock really since day one when Bedrock started in this journey, and they've been a huge part of really a lot of what we've also built and following some of their vision and making it fit within our vision, et cetera. So excited to be here. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, I'm Michael Osmond. I'm Chief Technology Officer for Bedrock. Sort of leading the charge on all things technology. We're getting into data centers, citywide 5G networks, fiber, but also very importantly, things like sustainability and building automation and improving the efficiency and effectiveness of what we're doing. And so building automation is key to that. Been in commercial real estate for over a decade, doing a lot of this sort of stuff.
Thank you, guys. So let me lob a softball question out there, and either one of you guys can take this one. How involved is Bedrock? And I'm familiar, but I'd like for them to know, how involved is Bedrock early on with the consulting engineers who are working on your construction documents? I heard you mention your smart specification. I'm sure there's OPRs, and you guys have a process in place. What does that look like?
I'll talk on the smart building section. So we have a Bedrock, it's called the Smart Building Standard, and we issue that to the design firms right off the bat. And in that standard, we've standardized everything from what type of cable is being used, what the strand of wire is, what the cable color coding is for MSTP, whatever it may be, like a input, output. We have different color coding for them. We have custom built panels that are required for our property. So when you come to bid a Bedrock job, just be aware that in our standard, we have standard Jace and DMARC panels that Bedrock provides. So we purchase those. We do that for the intent purpose of owning the licensing for our Jaces, because we don't want to rely on contractors holding our licenses and having to try to get licenses back for updates or whatever. It was a nightmare prior to, we allowed contractors to purchase Jaces before, and then we had to get all the licenses back. So it just made sense for us to own that in-house. We have custom control panels now. So our control panels are all going to be cookie cutter. So they're ordered from Cochrane Supply, built by Tech to our standards, and they're essentially either going to be a Johnson panel or a Distech panel, whatever's been spec'd for that job, and they're going to be cookie cutters. Just the only difference would be more input output modules. So that way, when our team or an engineering team or outside contractor, whoever goes to one of our air handler panels, custom panels are all the same. They can pretty much expect the same thing, not that we have just a hodgepodge of parts and controls out there. So from the beginning, we're in that, and then we're involved in the design phase. So the engineering firms will design the control system based on what we're asking for. We review it. We mark it up. And when I say we, that's myself, John Guardiola's team. We go through the documents, mark them up. We send them out for RFP if we have our trade partners like Jeff at WJO or Chad Strong from Decal. They'll review drawings soon. If they catch something, they'll usually reach back out to us, because it's always great to have another set of eyes, and we'll make corrections at that time before it goes out. So we're involved from start to finish on these things. And when the project is awarded, we're in the award process. So we review the scope of work, the RFPs, we award the contracts. So we're involved in that part. And then throughout the journey of the project, my team, John's team, we've got guys we got boots on the ground walking the projects on a weekly basis, checking them, project managing them. So we're involved from start to finish.
Do you guys hire third-party commissioning agents ever, or do you guys pretty much have your own in-house commissioning process because of your involvement?
Right. It's both. It's interesting when we do these jobs. To Russ's point, we also have an MEP smart spec. We talk about what type of condensing boiler, if that's spec'd in the job that we want, and the efficiencies of such, chillers, all those things. We have all of that. And it's important to talk about it ahead of time. In the smart spec, what I love about the smart spec is it's grown. Listen, it's a living document. All of our documents are living documents, because obviously technology changes so much. You alluded to that with a couple of facts that you shared. But, these documents are shared in advance. Listen, you've got engineers, you got the PBAs, you got the whoever may be doing mechanical engineering, even our development companies that come in, architectural engineers who look at this, they all are exposed to this so that we build it correctly. The smart spec also talks about things that really relate to our end of it. We talk about how we integrate diesel generators for emergency power. We talk about how we integrate fire life safety panels, and what can we see, what can we not, what can we control, what can we not. On the sustainability side, we talk about smart meters, big for us, right? Smart meters for tenants all the way up through equipment. Create great pages off of that. Our MSI is a huge help with that. So great. Eddie and company work with us on creating energy pages, and it all rolls into overall Bedrock requirements, whether it's sustainability, whether it's operations, whatever we want. And the interesting part is we do hire commissioning agents. It depends on the job, how big the job is, right? We might have a commissioner that comes in on the job right from the very beginning, and they're kind of our watchdog as well. They're third party. They don't have a dog in a fight. We hire them. They watch for things. They are well trained on all of our standards and specifications as well.
You just read my mind.
Yeah, and they watch that. They watch that for us, and they'll come back to us in these meetings saying, you're supposed to be able to control this X, Y. Don't you want to see this point, that point? There's hundreds of thousands of points out there in the building management system. And then with Russ's team, and one of the things I want to make clear, when you have a strong MSI who's watching these, you can integrate something that doesn't exist. So we spec something, we want it operated this way. And having a strong MSI who comes in and integrates this, working with Russ's team and puts these points together on our program so that at the end of the day, our building engineers can run it. If something's missing, we usually get, hey, by the way, it's a commissioning in itself. It's a form of commissioning in itself as well through the BMS system. So we kind of, when I say both, it's kind of an in-team as well, and we hire commissioners as well. And then sometimes we do RCX after the fact. We'll come in after the fact and do, a retro commissioning, and Russ and team is huge on that. We've had great success over the last 3 years doing that for some of the buildings that are 10, 12, 14 years old, who maybe we bought them operating, you know what I'm saying? We didn't build them. So, it's great to go back with retro commissioning and work. The BMS is huge for that as well and saved us a lot of money.
Nice. Well, you guys know that cyber awareness is at the forefront of a ton of topics out there, right? And because you guys have your own, built environment, you have your converged networks, your segments, and all that good stuff. And this is a question for you, Jack. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah,
right?
I was ready for it.
So what does, just in general, what does cyber governance on the OT side look like for you and your team? And how do you integrate the IT over your IT personnel over to the OT side to bird dog their projects as they go from start to finish? Because we know that there's no real cyber commissioning process out there that we know of right now, unless you guys have invented one, right? For internally.
Right.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
So basically, any communications coming inside the building, in or out of the building, goes through one of my firewalls, right? And with that, we have implemented all the security that we need to do on there. There's a ton that you can do, we could go through, but we also have our logs that we look at to make sure, is someone trying to do something, is someone trying to get in, or someone in trying to do something inside that's not recommended, right? So we're constantly monitoring our logs. We have a third-party managed service security provider that will alert us to, we have this IP address trying to get in, it looks like a bad actor, do you want us to block it? Yep, block it right away. Or we have certain countries trying to come in, there's no reason why there is, so let's go ahead and block those off. So looking at the needs of the site and the building and what we're putting in there from a technology standpoint and what kind of communication needs to go in and out. And we only allow what we need in and out. It's not a whole carte blanche, everything can go out, everything come back in.
So
we lock it down pretty
trust
tightly.
or?
Yeah, 100%, yeah. We lock everything down pretty tightly for that reason. And if something goes wrong, it's logged, and then we usually get a communications from our managed service security provider to let us know that something's going on.
So when you're looking at network management tools, because you guys have IT and OT, you have a converged network, are you using different network management tools on the IT and the OT side? Because I know that there's a couple providers out there that are developing, network management tools for OT that specifically look at BMS systems and other operational technology, or are you using one network management tool?
So there's a couple things that we use for. So right now, all of our networks are Cisco Meraki networks. So they have a nice dashboard with the security awareness in it that we go through and look at. And we also use another third-party tool to manage all of our devices, to look at our devices and see what's going on with that. We don't use anything specifically for OT, but we are managing it pretty heavily.
Okay. Nice.
Well, and I'd just like to add, we don't have a converged network. Right? We have, so our enterprise network is controlled by Rocket companies, because we're a sister company, Rocket Mortgage. And they have a huge cybersecurity staff that manages our enterprise networks and Wi-Fi and things like that. We have our own internal network that we use for building automation and things like that.
And that's totally air-gapped from the other network?
100%.
Yes.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Russ and I had a conversation not that long ago, and you mentioned moving a lot of your OT to the cloud, right? Talk to me a little bit about how you guys came to make that decision, what benefits you're finding, if any, right? And what does that look like?
So our prior BMS infrastructure resided at the Rosa Parks data center, which was owned and operated by Bedrock in conjunction with Everstream. And we housed everything there on physical servers. So what we were having is we were starting to get glitches in the matrix, if you want to say. We started getting slower communication from our Niagara system back to our code platform, the BMS platform. We also were having servers crash occasionally, which took our whole systems down. And we started evaluating it. And with our expansion, because we're always expanding, right? So we're bringing on probably another 3.5 million square feet between Hudson's Book and other developments we have going on here in the next year or two. So we constantly are adding servers to the racks, which is expensive. So we sat down with Code Labs, and they had started doing for other customers, they had putting their systems on the Google Cloud, right? Going to the cloud, and it intrigued us. So we started looking at the benefits of it, and after we ran down the numbers, it just made sense. So to go to the cloud with unlimited storage space and probably a higher standard of security than we currently had at our own servers, we found a cost savings of $225,000 annually from being on our own house servers because of all the maintenance and things we had to add to the systems all the time. So we decided to make that switch, and that was a terrifying moment for me because we were taking an existing infrastructure which housed 59 integrated properties over 13 million points, from our servers, and moving this all to the cloud. And we had to do this without taking our systems down. And hats off to Code Labs, they pulled this off. So we made that switch in the middle of the night one night, and boom, we were up online by 6 a.m. with no glitch. We've been up on the cloud now for a year. We haven't had one moment of an outage. We have not had any instances where we've noticed reduced speeds from the GCP servers or anything like that. So it's been a great transition for us. It's been more stable. We're able to store our trends and history logs, all that on the cloud now. So we have unlimited data. We pulled the data that we currently had for 10 plus years at Bedrock, which was sitting on our servers. We pulled that data out of our servers and moved that up to the cloud. So when it comes to data governance or being able to collect and pull data, we can pull back all the way to when John put the first building online before I worked here. So that decision was based financially because it was, savings yearly, but it was also based on performance from the other customers that they had let me have an insight into their portfolios on and looked at, and it just, the proof was in the performance, and no looking back on it for us. It was a fantastic move.
So it sounds like you guys lean on your MSI as a trusted advisor when it comes to some of your technology decisions, whether you're deploying new technology, how you're storing data, how you're moving data. So talk to me a little bit about your approach to moving them over to the cloud, and what was your business case sell to them?
From a Code Labs perspective, foundationally, like the thesis we started the company on is taking the built environment to the cloud. That's really what we believe in. Frankly, we don't do any more, hosting of our platform on any data center. Bedrock is unique, as I stated earlier, because we've been working with Bedrock really since the founding of the company, and the flexibility there and doing certain things with a partner, really, not just a client for us. But the pitch for the cloud is really simple in our view. Everything that we have in our pockets right now goes to the cloud. So all these different misconceptions and things that I think tomorrow, I know my co-founder actually has got a session that he'll go a bit deeper into this. But if everything is going to the cloud, including moving vehicles, why are standing buildings not going to the cloud? It's kind of the mindset that we have at Code Labs. So for Bedrock, it was really easy. John and Russ and everybody, Mike and Jack touched on the foundation that they have in place already with regard to, building the networks, having a separate network for the buildings, the smart building standards, et cetera, really build that foundation. And then on top of that, you have this layer, some call it single pane of glass, some call it a data lake, et cetera, BMS, whatever you want to call it. Our pitch was really simple. Financially, it makes a ton of sense. From an just day-to-day operations perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And then from a future-proofing perspective, it's an absolute no-brainer, because what Bedrock has across their whole portfolio today now is they have a platform where if tomorrow they want to install a new sensor, if they want to integrate to Cisco Meraki for whatever reason, or they want to integrate to parking, which is another thing that's going on with some of the things Bedrock has going on now. Now they have that platform where they can plug and play and scale in literally a couple of clicks across the whole portfolio versus doing this one at a time and costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So recurring costs lower, ongoing costs as you scale. I mean, lower is an understatement because you quite literally, I want to integrate this in this building, and now I want to take that across the whole portfolio. You're talking a matter of minutes at that point. It's entering credentials and going. So, and then last but not least, from a security perspective, it's a completely different game, right? You're going to, whether it's AWS or GCP or wherever you're going, redundancy, security, scalability, et cetera, it's just a completely different game from what we're traditionally used to, where, I mean, even before, like, hey, we're adding this building. Okay, great. Do we have enough space? Do we got to add more of this, less of that? And it's like, you want to do that, or you want to go to a company that does that for a living, is scaled globally. For us, it was a no-brainer, and thankfully, in working with a company that has that vision and sees the future in a way that I think we all believe should be viewed from an industry perspective, just makes things a lot easier and simpler to move on.
Right. Has IP technology helped with that movement?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we think that, as time goes on, that's also going to change. And again, hats off to Bedrock and kind of laying a foundation, right, that now allows them to do these things. So if we go to, more IP-based, which we believe we're going to, and then I think the proof is there, as more IP systems and devices, et cetera, are added across the building, then the next phase is like, okay, what are the layers that we could remove potentially now because we can go IP to cloud, right? So there's just a ton of things that this foundation allows them to do now.
Yeah, it kind of segues into my next question, and it's for either one of you guys. What was the main motivation for you guys moving to primarily all IP technology when it comes to your BMS?
Savings financially. So with us going to the cloud with Eddie and these guys. So first of all, I want to give Jack's team some praise too for that move from our servers to the cloud. I forgot to mention his team. His team worked hand in hand with Code Labs, making sure that our ports were open, our IPs were accurate. He made sure that the communications were proper, that everything was transmitting back and forth. So without Jack's team, so I'm actually very blessed to have that team in Bedrock, because our control system resides on its own separate infrastructure versus our tenants or anything like that. So we have unlimited bandwidth and a very reliable, robust network. So Jack, thanks to your team for that one as well. It was a good move. Why we went to IP. So I talked with Tritium, James Johnson, George Keller, and these guys years ago, back 2017, when we were considering, when we knew the Hudson site was going up and Book Tower was going up. And so our traditional Bedrock infrastructure is we have network switches on every floor, sometimes 2 quadrants. We'll have them 2 sides. Sometimes we have them on 4 sides. And in those quadrants, we'd have a Jace, okay? So the Jace would be, went out and talked to all the devices on the floor. It was VAVs, air handlers, domestic water pump boosters, fire systems, lighting systems, whatever. The Jace was what we used to bring all those devices in. It's very costly, right? So you add up the cost of the hardware of the Jace, which is relatively, the lower part of purchasing a Jace, right? It's the licensing where you spend the most money. So with the help of George and James and Vinny was involved in that, we found like to go to a supervisor on the cloud. Since we were moving to the cloud, let's go with a Niagara supervisor. So that's actually what we've done for the Book Tower and Hudson. So that decision moved us towards IP. So at the Book Tower and Hudson site, we're going to have just 1 Jace per building. That Jace is just going to house critical infrastructure like scheduling for air handling equipment if we lose connection to the cloud. It's going to handle scheduling for our lighting systems, RGB, because we do those beautiful lights in the sky. So all that stuff will be standing there as a backup in case we have to, if we lose our connection, right? We lose our force schedules. This will keep it on place. But what we've done there is, because we've chosen to go with 1 Jace and a supervisor, we're bringing back everything IP into our network switches, and that was a driving force for that. So is there a savings? Yes, we're saving on the Niagara infrastructure, but there is a cost to IP. And I was resistant to go IP at first because, I'm old school in some ways. I started out with LAN back in the day and then moved into BACnet. So my preference was a twisted pair communicated wire. But since we've moved over to IP and I've had a chance to, really get into it and work with it, it's, in my opinion, superior. I think that's the way the market's going to go. And Bedrock going forward, that will be our approach. So we'll be supervisors in all IP systems.
So that takes me to your thoughts on BACnet SC, BACnet Secure Connect. I'm sure that conversation has been happening in some of the rooms and some of your meetings. Talk to me a little bit about your acceptance or your thoughts on maybe not moving as fast to BACnet SC. And what does that journey look like, if the journey has started at all?
It started, so we have to buy licensing for it and things like that. But I don't see it as a hindrance. It's just it's part of the business. Just another license. Whether you're buying Echelon credits or you're buying BACnet SC credits, the same. So it's not going to deter us or move us away from BACnet. BACnet is our preferred communication protocol. So we're going to still move forward with it and just absorb the hit like everybody else.
Right. From an MSI standpoint, does it do anything as far as your deployments are concerned or how you approach, your customer?
No, I mean, outside of what Russ touched on, which is making sure that obviously the customers want to go that route and they want to take, using your words, Russ, take the hit. If we can word it that way, from our perspective, we're agnostic to all of this. We have to be prepared to be able to communicate in different communication protocols, and we are. So whether it's some new thing that comes out tomorrow that we have to prepare for, again, the beauty of software and the beauty of cloud and having, as an MSI, whether we're working with channel partners who are MSIs and we're helping support them, or we're working like with Bedrock where we're intimately involved ourselves. We have the capabilities in-house from a software perspective, which we believe is going to be key, right? Because software is really going to lead hardware. We're already seeing that. So we have the ability to basically adapt to these new things as they're coming up a lot faster. And again, affordably, right? It's not a long, convoluted conversation about how do we scale this across the portfolio. We can do it in this building, not that building, et cetera. It's, I'm sure you guys hear this a lot where it's like, click and go, but it's quite literally that. We can hand off the mouse to anybody and go into the Bedrock portfolio, and they'll be able to work, to get to certain things on their own. So to answer your question, it makes no difference to us at all.
To expand on the point, though, that Eddie brought up, I mean, being agnostic and being able to bounce, we've got a large portfolio, all right? And depending on what we're building or what we're going to buy, and even the uses of buildings, the building behind us, Hudson's book, it's now, hospitality, it's residential living, it's commercial, it's giant restaurants. If we buy a building that already has the system in it, and that was kind of why we created way back in the day this open source platform, because I'm not going to spend the money. We talk about there's savings, right? I'm not going to spend the money to rip everything out and put something back into it, right? So I want something that can talk to Siemens, Johnson Controls, whatever it is, and depending on what the platform is, right? And that, from the very beginning, being built that way is what is helping us with this new technology that's coming into what you're talking about. I think it's so key to build it from the beginning with that mindset, that open concept mindset.
Yeah, nice. So I guess this question is for both Jack and Mike, and you guys can address this. Talk to me a little bit about your in-house cyber governance policy, so to speak, as to how you deal with MSIs, how you deal with selecting manufacturers, and your in-house cyber security policy for users on the OT side. Did that make sense?
Kind of. So when you say users, so to me, a user is a device that sits on my network, right? I don't have actual individual people with their laptops on my network, right? It's all building controls. It's rock securities, cameras, door access, stuff like that. So we lock it down pretty tight, as tightly as we can, to make sure that we know the data going in and out. And there's a difference between intercommunication within the network and then going outside the network, right? So we have to make sure that we lock down VLANs, so segments of the network, so you can't hop from one to another one. There's a lot to consider when you start talking security. You really have to understand what devices you have on your network and how they need to communicate. And then there's a situation where if you do have a breach or an issue, how do you handle that, right? What happens when you have a bad actor on your network? What do you do, right? You shut down the port where you believe the device is on there. You contact the team, like Russ's team, like, hey, we have a device that's labeled BMS, but I just took it down because it was doing something it wasn't supposed to do. We had a situation where we had a device in the network that was just spewing out to all different countries. Our MSP said, hey, you have something going on here. I'm like, yep, we do. Shut it down. Just shut it down. I then contacted our stakeholder and said, hey, this is what's going on. It's completely shut down. We're going to pull it off our network. We're going to physically pull it off our network because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Figure it out. Go ahead and contact your vendor or what have you, but it's off the network at this point in time. So you have to move quickly. You have to respond quickly, but you also have to respond intelligently to make sure that what you're seeing, what exactly what you're seeing is just you're securing the network at all points. So.
Yeah, his security is pretty robust. So I'll give you guys a story. Back a few years ago, one of Jack's guys, George, reached out to me. He says, hey, we've got an unknown IP over here at OCM in the penthouse on 16th floor that I shut it down, locked it out. Do you guys know what this is? So my office at the time was just around the corner. So I literally left my office, walked around, and there was a contractor over there. He had his laptop sitting on a cart, and he had plugged into one of our network switches in our BMS panels, and Jack's team picked that up quickly and locked him out. So he didn't have access rights. He didn't follow the right protocol to log into the system. So his security picked that up and shut it right down. So it's pretty amazing what we have going on here.
And that's another important thing to bring up too. It's if you have a network switch somewhere and you have available ports, you need to shut down those ports because you don't want someone to plug into something and not realize what it's doing.
So do you guys do port security just via the hardware, software, or do you do both hardware and physical port locks?
So it's
for empty ports.
So it's not physical locks, it's software, right? So we disable the port. So if you plug something in, it's not going to light it up. It's not going to, if it's a PoE device, it's not going to get power. It's completely shut down. Yeah, we don't do physical locks. We do software on that.
Okay.
Hopefully you lock your network closets, right?
Yeah, well, and that's another thing. I mean, I'm not going to talk forever on some of this stuff, but like, for example, every one of our network rooms has a specific design to it. It has to have card access with two-factor authentication. So you badge in, you punch in a code. When you walk in, you're greeted to a camera, right? Anyone walks in and out, there's a camera. If it's a network room that's used more than by just Bedrock, there's other people in there, then we lock the cabinet down as well. So you have to have a cabinet key with you as well. So we do a lot to try to physically secure our devices to make sure that, and if someone gets through all that and then decides to plug in, that port should be disabled so they can't do anything. But by then, hopefully we have them on camera. Right. We have however they got into there, and then we can deal with it and then learn from that, right? And secure up wherever we need to do it. So
sounds pretty secure to me. So you mentioned devices. What does the process look like for you guys evaluating technology that's going to go on your network, right? Whether it's a different vendor comes out with some new technology that you guys looked at, you thought it may be cool. Now there's an evaluation process before you invite it into your environment. What does that process look like?
So for the smart building equipment, we have great trade partners like, Tritium was really good with us with helping design the supervisory for the Hudson's and Book, right? So in a way, it goes against their own interest because it's cost them the sale of a Jace, but they, didn't even blink at that. They, helped us design that out. Cochrane Supply, Scott and those guys are fantastic. Whenever a new product comes out, they'll send it my way, and if we have interest in it, we'll bring it on and we'll set up a demo somewhere because we have so many spaces in our portfolio that are, available to do testing, like for indoor air quality sensors or occupancy sensors, anything like that. So we'll get products from Cochrane and we'll put them out there, run them. We'll try to do like a minimum 90 days, see how they work out.
Like a bench test?
Yep, we have vetted products for Joe Patnott, who worked here prior. He's now over at 75F. we have some pilots for him going on where they're trying to develop their technology to do more of a larger scale commercial real estate. So we have some of his product out here that we're vetting currently for him. So Bedrock, within reason, will do pilots for just about anybody if it makes sense. And that's really how we get a lot of our technology that we add to our smart specifications. As John said, the smart building standard, it's a living document, right? So not only is it a living document for devices, but it's also for trade partners. So in that document, we have approved and vetted temperature control contractors that we use primarily because of their performance on the job site's been amazing. Working with them has been a great collaboration, right? So we all know if you're working with a contractor or even a building owner, if they're difficult, it's not a good marriage and something you don't want to move on with. So we have selected the contractors that we've had good performance with and good relations with. They've made that list, so when we put a job out to bid, we have 10 current partners on there. We don't send the RP to 10. We'll select based on evaluation of what they've done, projects they've done for us, like who we're going to have bid, like the Hudsons or the Book, depending on, because not every temperature control contractor does the same work. Some are more geared for light commercial, some are more geared for the big high rises, right? So we pick those partners that we feel are going to give us the best opportunity for having an amazing BMS system in those sites. So that helps as well too, because our trade partners will reach out to us and say, hey, we just tried this device over at, Paul. Sometimes I hear things you guys have done at Ford, from Eddie or Etrit. Being our MSI, they've been very resourceful for us too. They'll run new products down the line, whether it's a software software or if it's an actual physical device. They run partners, they set up meetings, we go through like the testing, evaluating, and then we decide, hey, do we want to put this product in to give it a shot? So that's really how we get to where we're at with devices. It's a process. We don't just make decisions on a whim. We actually do vet things out. And John, you guys do the same thing with mechanical, if you want to broach on that.
Yeah,
Hey, Russ, let me just talk for a minute. So we're implementing a new process internally where we move new products, technologies, things through a series of gates, proof of concepts, pilots, and rollouts. So we have the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, where we partner with Ford and Bosch and others. And so we're testing things like potentially, chargers or autonomous parking, things like that. We're also going to be establishing the Urban Integration Lab, which is just up the street here. We'll have a Code Labs platform running, and that'll be the place where we will direct anybody who wants to show us how their stuff works to go in there, integrate with the Code Labs platform and other technologies and things that we'll have in there. We're doing a lot within building cellular, Wi-Fi, things like that. And once it's kind of proved out, those are our proof of concept labs. We'll move them into pilots. So right now at the Ally building, we have an in-building cellular pilot running. And once we solve all the things we want to solve within building cellular, we'll be rolling that out across the portfolio. So it's kind of this, very sort of gated process for evaluating and integrating new technologies. And one of the biggest challenges I think we face in technologies, I sat in the Honeywell presentation. Anywhere here in Honeywell, I don't have anything against you. But, I showed a new technology, VAV controller, and, I know it's copyright 2019. Well, the biggest challenge, I think, for technology is that things are moving super, super fast, right? And when you start building a building years ago and you select your technologies, you do all that, by the time you open, it's going to be obsolete, right? For example, been spending a lot of time on cellular. So that building behind us, when it opens, there will be no cellular coverage in it unless we do something now, and it wasn't contemplated. 4G, 5G, today they're opening skyscrapers in New York that have no cellular because the cellular carriers were going down this path. The property owners and developers were going down lead, low E glass, all these things, and essentially building a giant Faraday cage. And so I think the ability to postpone decisions about technology until the last minute is one of the most critical things that I haven't seen anyone yet doing well. right? So by the time we get in there and keeping those specifications accurate, even if you keep them up to date, they made decisions 3 years ago about what you were going to put in that building. And so we're scrambling to come up with a solution for in-building cellular, because I think Dan Gilbert's going to have one of those condos at the top and he doesn't have a cell phone signal, he's not going to be happy. So, I think that, it's critically important that building engineering, controls, and technology work together. Because, at the end of the day, we want to have basically a single converged network, except maybe not completely, that's handling cellular, it's handling IP. I want to have options for connecting cameras. I want to have options for connecting building automation equipment. If I've got a private network, private cellular network, connecting devices to that's almost free, versus having to rely on public cellular or not being able to put cameras in certain places because I can't get network connections to them. I tell people, if you build a house 10 years ago, you'd have wires throughout it. Build a house today, it's all going to be wireless, and I think that's the future. But I don't know how many people in here are thinking about how they're going to use cellular or Wi-Fi or whatever and how they're going to secure it, but it's coming. It's inevitable.
That's a very good point. And you guys keep referring to that smart spec, right? I've seen a copy of it. I think when I first started with Cochrane years ago, I saw a copy of it. And I've seen that thing evolve. But the first thing that came to my mind, the first time I saw your smart spec, was how simplistic it was in nature, how easy of a read it was. Not the technology. The technology wasn't simplistic, but how easy it was to read and identify and understand your intent as an end user. So talk to me about the process of going to a smart specification opposed to the typical CSI version of a specification for building management systems, which we all know is filled with a ton of sections, subsections, sub-subsection, and sub-sub-subsection, right? So talk to me a little bit about that, the creation of the smart spec.
I'll let you talk about the creation because I wasn't here at that time.
No, I get it. Well, once again, it was created to be used as a guide. Here's a guideline. There were none. There were none when we started, and engineers were designing what they thought was right. What we learned a long time ago when we first started this journey was not a lot of engineering firms had a controls engineer or strength in a controls engineer in their company. They had electrical engineers, they had mechanical engineers, and they were very strong at what they did, right? But controls, even just 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of strength in design and engineering firms. So we wrote it so that those folks could understand it. Right, we knew what we wanted. We knew how we wanted our systems to operate. We knew how we wanted them integrated, what we wanted to see, what we didn't want to see, and then with the future in mind. So it was very wide open in the very beginning with just basic understanding of controls so that the professionals in the field can understand it. And then pretty soon the mechanical engineer, oh, so you mean this, so you can see this. Electrical engineer would start working with us, and it grew and grew. And God, that's when Russ and some others came on board who, just really very strong at this, and that's when it turned into, all right, I want this specific type of wire. I want this point to talk to this point. I want, and even to the point where the engineers used it to where we would decide in the spec who would run the low voltage wire for our generators, for our fire panels, for our air handlers, our chillers. It even grew to that because what we learned.
To the point you're assigning the work to make sure.
Lessons learned. I mean, we started out, it was a lessons learned document. It was a high level document to talk about what we wanted to see and how, and in the language that the professionals could control. But as we built these as we, for the 10th building, the 40th building, the 100th building, it grew and grew and grew from lessons learned, right? And that's kind of still where it's at with technology changes and lessons learned.
And the revisions we make are typically, 4 times a year I go through, and revisions are either new technology we're putting in, technology we're dropping out, because, through COVID, that was a challenge because, things that you have specified that you want used weren't necessarily available. So we had to find other products and vet them out and put them in there. So that document's been, going that way. But the thought process behind the smart spec, because even though I wasn't at Bedrock at the time, I did have some input with Joe Patnod and Tavis Kerr and others. They reached out for advice on there was the, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Keep the documents simple to where trade partners could understand it, that you don't go too far in the weeds with the wording, right? So just keep it simple, like, temperature control contractors, if you give them a diagram that tells them exactly what type of wire you want, what color, what strand, what gauge, boom, it's right there on that little list. They just print that page out. This is what they order. It makes it simple, right? And why those standards are put in place, it's twofold: to standardize a cookie cutter pattern for Bedrock for all of our systems, but also my team, if they go out and they're looking for, we lost connectivity to a Jace. What happened to the Cat 6 cable? We know ours is a bright pink, right? So that's what feeds our Jaces, so we look for that. Jack Security is green, and what are you guys using?
So there's a variety. So we have purple for APs. We have every combination we have different colors for everything. So we can look up and say, okay, there's one of our APs there. This is done correctly or not done correctly, and what have you. So
it was done with purpose. That way we have a standardization, so we know what cable we're looking for, right? Because cable trays can be ridiculous. So yeah, that's what that document is, and it's ever evolving. But for the most part, I think our trade partners, I haven't gotten any negatives on it. So every once in a while they'll say, hey, you've got a mistake in here. And, I'll look it up and say, oh, yeah, I sure do.
Yeah.
So that's why I love our trade partners out there because, everyone that Bedrock works with has earned the right to do work with Bedrock, and they're good partners. They look for opportunities to save us money. They look for opportunities to help us maybe where we've missed something in our design of our systems, So that's always been one of the reasons why I actually love doing what I do here, because my job is easy when other, trade partners help us out.
Right. And that document drops right into the construction documents, or do they take bits and pieces and put it into their existing BMS specification? Do you know what I mean? Do they tear it apart and keep the language and try to strategically place it within their specification? Or do you direct them to, boom, here it is, don't change it, leave the wording the way it is, and we direct these contractors to the smart specification in the individual divisions like Division 27, 26, 23, so forth?
Right. Yeah, no, it's not editable by anybody but myself and Bedrock. And when we issue the whole document. But what I do is I have cut sheets, like synopsis of certain areas. So if I know if a contractor is looking for, hey, what's your wire code, and it's as simple as just email me and I'll send you the sheet, with saving you from having to look through 330, 380 documents, whatever it is right now. So we do that as well. So we issue the entire standard out to the trade partners, and they have to review it, and that has saved us on quite a few jobs where, to John's point, the electrician will install an EMON. Well, part of his installation, if you read the smart specification standard, they're required to run the communication bus back to the network switch or the port on the Jace, and a lot of times that is missed by the electrician, and there's finger pointing going around, and we say, do you have the smart standard? They say yes, and it's like, well, that's your scope. So it saved us in many aspects that way as well.
Right, for you guys to enforce your specification makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it's their due diligence to review the document and make sure they adhere to it, right? And if they don't, we'll catch it, because like I said, my team, we have a project management team as well with Andrew Way and Jay Robbins are also out there checking our jobs. So we're always constantly monitoring our projects, making sure that our standards are being met.
Yeah, you just read my mind. I was going to ask you, what does your team look like? Like as far as the organization, from your technicians to your field guys to your project managers, what does that team look like?
So our construction team has a couple project managers, Andrew Way and Jay Robbins. Very good guys, seasoned guys. They were out in the trades before they came to Bedrock, like myself and others. So they oversee the higher arching levels of the project, like the paperwork, the meetings, things like that. My team, I have a couple guys that have been in the business for a while. They actually physically walk the sites for me, attend the meetings, and they'll work with the contractors, like doing the punch list vettings, functional testing, things like that.
So they go to the commissioning meetings, they're part of that process.
Yep. Okay. And we do proof of performance on the equipment. So before we let a contractor leave, we run everything through its paces, and if we see any issues, we let them know.
It's the same thing on the engineering side. We're partners, obviously, as we talked about, for all MEP requirements, fire, life safety, emergencies, environmental. We have an environmental team as well to watch how these things are being built and underground storage, all the stuff that goes into a building, right? We do the same thing. We've got content experts within the team that have been project managers and et cetera. And we partner with teams like Russ all together on these, and we look at very specific things to make sure it's done well as well in the field daily.
Wow, this was great stuff. Jeez, this was great stuff. Do we have any questions out there? We're running out of time. We have to get into our next. Okay, let's get the mic here.
I have a question. Yeah, it was interesting in fact that you guys were talking about.
Oh, sorry. When you're working with the engineering firm regarding the technology and specifications, so in my approach, as I work, I think communicating that to the engineering firms to be able to tell them and teach them in a lot of ways to have that living document available, and then towards the end of the construction process to be able to implement those strategies and technology. And do you see that as the future? Do you see that as something that engineering firms are going to be open to?
Yes. It's already happened. I mean, I won't mention any names, but we've been working with engineering firms, some of them from the beginning. And I literally had several of the owners come to me and say, you know what, eat some humble pie, but we've learned from you. We've learned from you, especially on the control side and the mechanical spec side, and we're actually getting ahead. I see them get ahead of us now. When they write their spec, it's already written with these lessons learned on some of the things that we've learned together, right? We've learned together. So, and I've noticed, this is my vision I've seen with some of the engineering firms, is they now have a technology engineer instead of the standard, MEP engineer, or your electrical engineers. They have technology teams now in a lot of the larger engineering firms that speak the language. They see the need. It's gonna get more and more of a need as we grow, right? I mean, Mike said, even building your house, it's all wireless, everything's smart in it, right? I hope residential builders are getting ahead of the trend as well, because it's going to happen. So yeah, I see it happening now.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question here.
Thanks for sharing, guys. How long did that supply chain take to adjust? Is it years or months? I mean, as you guys dictated what, I guess we can specifically talk about the engineers, but like you have architects, you've got building permit people, you've got the city, like there's a whole bunch of stuff, whether it's a new building or an existing, there's a lot of, there's 5 of you and an equivalent on each of those respective silos, and the whole supply chain to make a real estate transaction happen is so sophisticated and complicated. And as you figure out what you want and you get clarity on that, then you got to kind of spit it out to the real world. And I'm just curious how many years. I mean, you're years into this now, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It's relationships too. Okay. I mean, Russ said that well. Part of how we spec is availability. I mean, if I want a specific chiller, if I want a specific cooling tower, lighting, it doesn't matter what. We talk about. Part of our specifications are, sourcing of it, right? I know that there are maybe local folks who can do specific lighting that I know are right there. Hell, I'll drive over to their warehouse and grab one if I need one, right? But, it's also, we've been very lucky. I will say that. I mean, Hudson's site behind us, as we grew, to your point, I think you said it, you designed this thing, 4 or 5 years ago, and then you're growing. We made, and I think this was a win for us, we made a change on the cooling tower that was going in, several cooling towers that were going into this 1.5 million square foot building because of technologies and changes, and we saw something that was going to fit our sustainability needs, save us 30% on X, Y, and Z, cost, size, all those things, and we were able to go to our construction and development team and said, I know this is what we spec'd. Here's a new technology. I have to do a business case forward on it and why it would work. And we were able to change the type of cooling tower that went in this building as it was being built. Awesome. And a part of that was because this new technology, number one, was a little more local. And I could get this new technology cooling tower 10 weeks before I could get the one that they had spec'd. Wow. So we constantly look at that all the time.
The relationships, it sounds like.
Relationships is huge.
Right? My second question was about when you made the switch to the cloud for all this, I'll call it infrastructure, it's like, that's like tangible stuff. I was just wondering, like, how do you wrap your head around that, and what happened to all that stuff that you no longer needed for that purpose? Did you use it for something else, or is that something you could rent out to?
They repurposed the data center, so that's been repurposed, and it's I don't know if those servers have been rented out or not yet, but that's just a decision we made, so that's been repurposed. The decision has been, so my entire career I've been a guy who doesn't just like sit back and wait. I'm a doer, right? So when they presented the opportunity, I started running it up the chain of command here at Bedrock to get approval for it. And once we had the authorization, the PO signed, it's like, let's set a date and let's let it rip. We planned it out. We're very strategic with it, but it was one of those things where it's all or nothing, right? You got to make a move. And code, Jack's team and my team, we all felt that we had it under control and we can make it happen overnight. And that's just what we did, and we were prepared for any type of issue we had. So we just went with it. It was like pulling a Band-Aid off. Let's go,
Any other questions out there?
So looking at our current environment with labor and our technical skill level that's coming up, and you guys got all these facilities, how are you leveraging your BAS in order to actually make your productivity of your maintenance easier, faster? How are you using your BAS to train, to include your new technicians into all these different facilities? Are you using virtual reality yet? What are you guys looking at, and how are you making your Niagara system actually work to its full potential?
So with the platform that we're running, all of our engineers have access to this platform. It's on their cell phones, iPads, laptops, whatever they may have, and we have trained them, fully on that. So the engineering team is very skilled at using the platform to identify issues. We've advanced the system to where we now have a functional testing tool on there, fault detection and diagnostic. We have optimized start stop. These are all features we've added to it over the last couple of years. We're now in the process of adding predictive maintenance to it, to where the platform is going to use the available data we have on an air handler or a VAV and say, hey, you've lost filter pressure. You might want to change these filters. So we're constantly using technology and leaning on technology to help our engineering team and my team. And the end goal is to reduce man hours on an air handler. Like, why have a guy change filters every 30 days and spend a couple $1,000s on an air handler and in just parts and labor, when we could actually have the physical sensors out there and we may get 3-4 months out of these filters? So we're leveraging everything we have in technology to shore up our teams, which will free up John's engineering team to do other things and preventative maintenance on air handlers. So it's all going to be automated here within the next 12 months.
And then the alarming, and I can't speak enough about the alarming program we put together. We've collaborated, with Russ's team and ours, and said, yeah, I need to know when this happens, right? It's a 24/7 operation here. It's madness with, restaurants, and you've got multifamily and industrial, and you've got commercial. So there's never not a time when one of the buildings needs somebody to do something. Having a 24/7 team can get costly. So when we put together an alarming program for everything that you could think of, because there's points, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of points that we can see and look at. Why not take those points and alarm them, right? And we do levels of alarming where it goes out to, I have a small 24/7 team. This team is very strong in this, and they can get this alarm and run. It can work its way up to myself or maybe a specific building engineer, which allows us to pick up your phone, look at the system on it, and figure out if it's just something simple, make an adjustment, et cetera, or can I dispatch now an on-the-ground person? It helps us make those decisions, and that's something that we worked on together and has grown as well. It's a great time saver for labor, and it's all on our BMS, and it all exists. All these points exist, so why not use it? We have to get creative with the programs that we create for these.
Yes, when we first rolled this out, it was shocking at how many alarms we had coming in. So at any one site, like a 1001, could have like 300 alarms sitting there active in the queue. Over time with my team and the engineering team, going through and diving deep into these issues. We've got that now to where like 1,001, I looked at this morning, had 2 active alarms, okay? So we've utilized the platform in our Niagara infrastructure to not only alert our teams of the issues, but to also train our teams of the issues. Like, it's not just acknowledging the alarm, it's actually physically going out there, finding out what's causing the alarm and resolving it. So, when we first rolled out the platform, we were probably running a 70% score in our buildings with, efficiency, and now we're running the mid-90s, like around 96 on most of these properties. So we've come a long way. And what does that mean for Bedrock? It means financial savings, right? So that means money we can spend elsewhere for more technology or other things.
I think that's one other question. We have another question. Young man right there.
With the BMS software, how is the connection? How does that roll out? Are you using a data lake, or are you attaching a JSON? And then how are you configuring the data so the software reads it properly?
You want to talk about your software, Eddie?
Sure.
But if you want to.
No.
Don't give out all the secrets.
I'm happy to. I mean, honestly, it all ties back to these standards, right? So when, the Bedrock team is working with the different contractors, they have a standard as to like, how things are supposed to be set on, Niagara, whether it's the JSON or whatever they may be using, which then enables, so think of it as it's like the building blocks, right? There's a standard to take everything up to that Niagara, from Niagara into our platform is a fully automated system from there. Also does the check-in, the commissioning, whatever people call it these days, to make sure that all the requirements that Bedrock initially had in place have been followed, and if not, report in real time once that connection comes back, so that the teams that they have working in these different projects can have that, that conversation with whatever the contractor working the project is. So it goes, to kind of sum it up, the standard on, how you install, the standard on how you bring everything to, first step or second step, whatever Niagara is. And then from Niagara to our platform, so long as those standards have been followed, those requirements have been followed to get to our, to get everything into our platform from there on is really, frankly, simple. And again, a few clicks at this point, because we've used things like machine learning, et cetera, to learn to learn these requirements and check against them. It's a fully automatic process of that.
Is your software able to automate like set points, or are people manually changing dials?
You can. There's a choice. Yeah, there's a choice. You can do either or. So if they want to turn a building, on full command control from our platform, that accounts for things like schedules and outside weather and occupancy if it's in place, et cetera. You have the ability to do that. The platform also doesn't just control it, but it reports back on how we're doing against these requirements that were set. I.e., I need to reach X temperature by this time. Okay, on this floor, we missed it by 4 minutes. On this floor, we hit it. So you're getting this real-time reporting, through the platform. That also then, again, checks us and the platform to make sure that we're doing right by the building, and can make that decision to your question about, do I want to control things manually, or can I trust the platform to do things on their own? And I think across Bedrock now, we're getting further and further into trusting the platform to do this work, because and frankly, they have, somebody asked the question about talent, et cetera. When you have a unified, UI, UX, for lack of a better term here, across the portfolio, it makes it really easy to move people around, as well as more attractive when you go to hire, because you're not working on things that, from 1985, you're working on new tech. You're not talking data analytics. You're not talking, new technology that, frankly, doesn't exist in most portfolios.
Thank you.
I think we have one more. Pass it down here.
Hi, thank you. Are you guys publishing your smart building guidelines, or is this something that you're only using internally for your own properties?
It's an internal document that we've created. Obviously, we share it with our contractor partners, et cetera, but it's not something we put out there. We love to talk about it in these venues as well, but these are internal documents that are constantly upgraded.
Yeah, and one thing, we do share it. So we've shared it with Burl Happold had it, and they asked if they could use some of it for another, major real estate developer in Detroit, if they could use snippets of it. So we didn't have an issue with it because, it's about redeveloping Detroit, Cleveland, right? So we're trying to to help, right, the industry. We don't want to set it back. But what we don't want is someone to take our branding off, put theirs on, and say, hey, here's our document, But it could happen. We don't have copyright on it, so it could happen.
That's the worry. I mean,
I mean, you guys mentioned you've seen it on some designs already, right?
Yeah,
Some of your
yeah.
standards. And we'll say some of your standards or guidelines are core that could be utilized from everybody and helpful. And others maybe a little fringe preferences of products and so on.
Specific to our needs. It's
So I
both.
could just see that maybe other accredited or agencies who set standards and guidelines like ASHRAE incorporating some of that. And I was just curious what your intent was. Big picture, long term, is it just going to be for bedrocks or projects, or do you see this maybe developing into a whole new standard or guideline?
At this time, Bedrock, that would be up to our leadership if they wanted to share it out that way. But I don't foresee that happening, in the near future, because most people they have their own standard or they'll use it. But we have had, architecture firms and engineering firms take snippets of it and use it, and we're fine with that.
And maybe we'll get them to join REC, and then we'll make their smart spec or parts of it some of our best practice documents.
My question is, are you guys building like HMI displays for all of your buildings as well, or you're just internally like looking at the control systems?
For new builds like these state-of-the-art buildings like the Book and Hudson, we are using HMI on the control panels for our engineering teams. That way they can actually have that display right there. So that is happening there. Retrofits, it depends on the building, right? What the purpose is. Like the Hudson site's going to be our flagship building, right? It's probably going to be a beacon of the Midwest here when this thing opens up. So we wanted the best technology in there. So we do have HMI going to that building and Book.
And for the HMIs, are you guys the end user, or will the actual commercial building be the end user? Well, is there someone that's another end user, or are you guys the end users?
It will be primarily Bedrock Engineering, Bedrock Controls that will have access to that system. It'll be locked down from others unless it's an occupant in a tenant space that requires access to it. They'll have it, but for the most part, we'll give them limited access.
Okay. Have you guys ever encountered projects where your like actual tenants wanted their own like HMI displays to control their own like either whether it's a floor or I've worked in like large real estate properties, and a lot of them want their own tenant dashboards. So when you're renting it out, you can see all of your laboratories or what your temperature is or your airflow, et cetera.
Yep, I'll try to make this short because I know we're running out of time here, but yes. So the Vinton building, we have a Crestron system over there, and all the occupants there, because it's a high dollar rental building, right? So they have their own Crestron HMI system, which allows them to do everything from the HVAC to the lighting to blinds to their TVs, entertainment, whatever they want to do. So that is there. Currently, we're discussing that for the Hudson site as well for those residential units. So yes, we are rolling that out in our higher end properties.
Excellent.
I think I'll just add to that. They also have the ability for like commercial clients.
Right.
If a commercial client wants visibility only to their space, again, back to this foundation thing, through the platform that Bedrock has now in their buildings, we've actually done it for a couple already. They can carve out access for that tenant to only see their space. Furthermore, if the tenant has additional sensors that maybe Bedrock hasn't deployed across the portfolio or building yet, but they just want deployed for their space, through the same platform, the tenant can just plug and go, which again just makes for this like unique type of service to the end.
As a full service real estate company, why that's important, and I love it because I remember when we started the first one, we're getting more and more sophisticated tenants that want to live in our buildings, right? Commercial, we're talking about, right? Who are probably more technology savvy than even we are. So they've come in with these corporate requirements to operate lights, to operate temperatures, et cetera. So our platform was built so that we can give them a view in just their floor. And they can come to us and put in their own standards for their corporate standards. So it's a great program, yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I really, really do appreciate you guys joining me. It was a pleasure. This is where we start the slow clap. We're going to get started here with our last presenter of our program, AGM Energy Services. They're going to talk to you guys about what it is to deploy smart building technology through a master systems integrator's eyes. And we've got Andre Gooseby, Tim Horace, Christian Scheitler from AGM, and Jim Birch, who is with Platform Corporate Real Estate Nationwide Insurance. Okay, yeah, we'll have some questions for him. And we've got Russ Holton from Bedrock, who's going to stick around and add some additional color and perspective. So I guess at the end of the day, let's go through and you guys just tell who you are, tell what you do at AGM. Let's start with you, Andre.
Yeah, sure. Good morning. First, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Cochrane for hosting. I've had the privilege of being at this event for many, many years. Scott's vision, Scott Cochrane, his vision in planting seeds in some of the younger generation and having that generation have the opportunity to be here is great. And Greg, you and I have known each other for many, many years now, and just grateful for the opportunity to be on stage. My name is Andre Gooseby. I'm president of AGM Energy Services, and I am actually accompanied here on stage by some very talented people. I'm going to quickly tell you a little bit about them, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But to my immediate left is Tim Horace. He's our vice president of business development. Tim has over 35 years of experience, and Tim. Next to Tim is Jim Birch. He's our special guest today. Jim Birch is a platform consultant with Nationwide Insurance, Corporate Real Estate Division. And then we have Kristen Scheidler, who is our Director of Operational Technology.
Nice. And let me ask you just this. Let me ask you just a simple question to kick this thing off. What role does the MSI play when it comes to inserting yourselves early in a project? Like, how important is that?
I think it's an integral part. Would it be okay if I told you a little bit about who we are and what we do first?
Well, sure, let's go.
So AGM, I think what separates us from the traditional master systems integrator is we're all engineers. I probably failed to tell you, I'm a mechanical engineer by degree. I've got over 16 years in the industry. But as a systems integrator, our business was built around that. So we do this point-by-point inspection. We thoroughly understand systems, but we're also all engineers. Right, so our entire team is comprised of engineers. Tim is an electrical engineer. We have a robust group of computer science engineers, more mechanicals. We have PEs on staff. But with that, we also have a commissioning service offering. So through commissioning services, we truly understand building systems, fundamental commissioning, enhanced commissioning. We've done over 80 LEED certified buildings through the commissioning process. So it makes us uniquely different. It makes our approach a little bit different. We are a professional service provider, so our team does not have tool belts and trucks. We are the guys behind the laptops. We understand design, systems, creating those OPRs, those BODs, and those standards that were talked about with Russ and his team earlier. Our team thoroughly understands what that looks like, and we get involved very early in the process with our client base.
Okay.
If you want to.
Yeah, and one of the things that differs a little bit for those of you that sat through Bedrock's presentation, and Russ, your team did a fantastic job, and it was very informational.
Yes, you did.
We don't typically have the luxury of getting in on the front end of the construction of a building, so most of what we end up doing is working in existing facilities that have been around for some time and may have, traditionally been controlled pneumatically. So it's a little bit different role there. And what we've had to do is engage our customers' IT departments. And unlike Bedrock, which has a very sophisticated IT department that understands technology at its depth, we work with a lot of public organizations, school districts and county governments, sewage and wastewater, freshwater. And so those organizations a lot of times don't have the most sophisticated technology people when it comes to IT and OT. And a lot of times we have to walk customers down that path. And so there is a challenge that we have in trying to educate the people on building an OT network and building something that is secure. And Greg, from your experience with the real estate cybersecurity consortium, you know that there's a huge challenge in making that OT network secure and impenetrable. And a lot of times these organizations just don't have that sophistication. But it's a real challenge to get in there on the front end of the process, because the MSI's role is to oversee and coordinate all of that technology. So just as you did with Bedrock, Russ, if you're not in at that front end and you come in when the 90% DDs are already done and the spec is already written, and then they say, oh, hey, by the way, you guys have to be the MSI on this building, too late, particularly if they've already chosen a company to work with to do the temperature control contracting, because part of the MSI's role is going to be governing how the BACnet networks are going to be addressed and named and assigned. And if somebody's already half done with the programming of the controls for the building, this didn't meet our spec. Now what are you going to do? Go back and change it? Which it's costly, and we had a good customer that did that built a facility in Scottsdale, Arizona a couple of years ago, and they waited until they were almost completely done with the design process, and they said, oh, we want you to come in and govern this. Okay. Has the contractor already laid out their networks? Sure have. Okay. Have they chosen and dispersed the JACEs through the facility so that they, the contractor, have now chosen the loading on the JACEs as opposed to us as the MSI, which know how to properly direct the traffic through the network and make the building operate efficiently so you're not sitting there for 5 minutes waiting for a graphic to update. Well, no, they had 80 devices on an MSTP trunk and assigned it all to one JACE, and well, that's great. And so they ended up with a product that didn't work right, and the choice was go back and fix it or rip it out and start over again.
So it sounds like, because there's different levels of sophistication when you're talking about the end user, right? Like we look at a company like a Bedrock, right? They've gone through leaps and bounds to make sure that they're ahead of the curve when it comes to smart building technology. But then there's everything in between, right? And it sounds like for a good MSI that you have to be able to pivot and adjust your services based on the client, based on their need, and things like that. And what does that look like, Andre?
So ideally, as Tim alluded to, we always want to get in as early as possible. The one thing I wanted to sum up to what Tim said, our role as an MSI is truly to be an advocate. We want to be an advocate for the owner. We want to behave as an extension of their staff. If we can do that, because there are so many different levels of understanding of technology with the end user, it's our role to fill those gaps, right? So we constantly want to advocate. We want to push. We don't want to get caught in this world of what Tim was discussing, where you get in so late on the game that your true value is not demonstrated.
You're putting out fires.
But you do have to be able to pivot, because that ideal scenario that we just described does not traditionally exist. You get those phone calls late and, oh, we heard that we should be talking to you about this. So all of those real world examples give us the opportunity to have that experience when we meet the next customer, to say, we had something similar to this is what we were able to do, this is how we were able to capture it. And then, of course, you pivot, you move, and you do what's best for the end user. But our entire role is to act at their behest and always do what's best for the customer. That's our value.
Right.
And I'll touch on that, because I think a lot of it comes down to some comments that were made in the last session of building the relationships. It's not just about building relationships interior to a client or interior to an MSI, but it's about building the relationships between the two, between the next engineer, and having those conversations early on and discussing what the path is going to be, how we're going to move it forward, who's doing what part, defining the lines is hugely important to make sure that the product, the end result for the building operators are where it needs to be, and it starts at the technician level. I've been in the industry for over 10 years, about 14 years now, and I started out as a technician. Seeing the evolution of the systems, the evolution of the technology in the built environment has provided me an opportunity to advance through our company. As the director of our operational technology group now, I'm able to assist my team members that are out there dealing with the building operators, trying to fix the problems and saying, how do we need to take this to the next level? And that's where I think the good MSIs come into play, of being able to fill the gaps, like Andre said, of knowing where it's a problem, identifying it, bringing it to the next table of discussion, besides just saying, okay, yeah, this is a problem, we'll just go and fix it with this solution. That may not be the best solution. You may need to go and say, who else is out here experiencing it in a different technology world or a different device, and how can we better provide for a further forward-facing product end result?
Yeah, and you just mentioned technology. Speaking of technology, how has IP technology and emergence of IP devices and OT networks changed how you guys do business and go to market?
I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 sentences, and then I'm going to rip the cord and let them go. It has, you know, as an MSI, as an engineer, it gives us options, right? It gives us new options. It gives us more opportunity to explain to our end users different availability of things. You can't force anyone to do anything, but what you can do is expose them to that. You can tell them the do's and the don'ts. You can tell them the pros and the cons. And again, because we have such a vast amount of customer base through private and public sector, we bring all of those experiences and we say, we think this has worked here. It's not our job to tell you how to do it, right? It's our job to tell you where to stay away from. So I'll yield back and let you guys run with it.
Well, I think the IEP side of things has definitely brought the industry to more modern levels. It's ballooning, it's expanding, it's always changing. You know, the built environment is definitely a step behind, you know, real world experiences. Everybody carries around cell phones. You have such a large consumer base there, but it's finally coming to fruition with the changes in energy requirements in buildings. The codes that are coming out, or the requirements for reducing energy, carbon emissions, all that kind of stuff is pushing the technology into the buildings more. So the IP devices are definitely coming out more and more and being a part of the going forward. It changes us in the sense of our communication has to be in line with the IT departments. If there's not an IT department, that's where you have to branch out and be discussing it with the other consultants or providers in the area, depending on the client that you're working with. So it changes the dynamic of the conversation, but it means that we have to develop our team further to say, we have IT people on staff. We know technology with that regard, in addition to the built environment and the building technologies that we require. So it's changing our conversations with clients, because now we're having to talk more on the IT side of things. But that's where we look at building in the computer science people like myself and the other people in our company that have that computer base, so we know the conversations that need to be had with the IT departments, and we can speak to their language rather than just walking in and saying, here's what you need to do, and you need to give us access, and then you're never going to get anywhere, because they close their doors and they say, okay, you can go live in your own little world. But it's a collaboration then. It's a continual collaboration with the next group of people. So that's how the IP devices are changing our conversations.
And how do you guys talk to your customers about cyber awareness? Like if your customers bring up...
Hold on one second before you go into
please.
cyber. So in my environment, I have an IT, OT that are combined. So we don't do anything without the IT group's blessing. So in actually having an MSI that can come in with me and on the new products that I want to even trial in our buildings, do demos like Bedrock was discussing, I have to actually have somebody with me to actually talk to IT and actually get that pushed through, because if I don't, that the technology will be completely obsolete by the time I get through all the meetings with IT. And that's really no lie. I mean, it's absolutely the most horrible part of my job is actually dealing with IT. The part of the job that I really like is the new technology and actually seeing where I can take nationwide corporate real estate and actually taking it toward the future. But if I didn't have an MSI that had really good relationship with my IT department, I wouldn't go anywhere.
And that's really been our experience together, Jim, because you and I built that together. And you know, not to interrupt you, but I mean, on the start of our journey together with Nationwide, it was like that credit card commercial with David Spade, where the answer was no to everything, right? I mean, you
think we've all
just say, hey, can we? No, don't even ask us. And and it's understandably so. If you think about Nationwide Insurance as a company, they're a major insurer and financial services organization.
That's a great point.
For their network to get compromised, I mean, all it has to do is once that hits the national media, you're toast, you're done, you're dead. Yeah. And so we brought Kristen in, and Jim had Kristen come in, and we sat down with their IT department and talked about the realities of putting an IP-driven product like Niagara onto their network. And just like you, Russ, they saw, that they did not want to be locked into any vendor. They own the licenses on the JACEs. They've done there's so many similarities to what they've tried to do with Bedrock, but I think it was probably 2 to 3 years of negotiation with their IT department before we arrived at policies that would work and support putting these OT devices in their building. And it was really funny because the access and security people followed behind us. They had been trying to get through, and they couldn't negotiate an appropriate policy and method to have an OT network for access and security. And we got the building automation in, and then they said, hey, do you mind if we kind of ride on your coattails? And Jimmy was great about working with them too.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, again, the conversations need to be had with the IT people. And their boundaries, their rules, regulations, when it relates to cybersecurity, it's an ever-evolving thing. There's hackers out there everywhere trying to get into these systems, regardless of whether it's a computer or a thermostat. So knowing that technology, or we're staying up with technology, the IT people are staying up with their technology, and we're constantly having conversations with them, ensuring the integrity of the networks, continuing to evolve the project, making sure updates are pushed through. We're ensuring the cybersecurity of the systems as it continues to evolve. We know patches come out. We push those through as soon as they can. So it's just a collaboration effort to make sure that the client's aware, both parties are aware of cybersecurity issues, and they're making sure that when they have issues on their side that we need to address, they're communicating that with us, and vice versa.
So are you guys doing any pilot projects for new technology? I know Bedrock is really, really big on that. So are you guys doing any pilot projects to proof things before you take them to IT? Have you guys taken those steps yet or no?
We got some pilot projects that we're trying to go through IT right this moment.
Okay.
But it's baby steps. That's all I can say is that it's painful and it's baby steps. But once IT jumps on board with us, then they want to go faster than I can ever actually get it implemented. So they have two speeds. It's either full stop or full go. The other portion of actually performing this service for Nationwide and actually going forward is actually looking at, since I do have this IT issue, looking at my systems that I already have in place and how can I actually use all of the system to its complete fullest. So since the Niagara system has already been vetted, IT loves it, I can do anything I want with it, is how do I actually come back to my MSI, say, okay, this is what I see in the future, this is where my pain points are. I need you to now look at this traditional building automation system, and I need to actually make this into a smart building. And this is what I see in the future of what I'm going to need. I'm going to have a shortage of qualified maintenance technicians. So therefore, I need analytics that are real-time analytics. I don't need an analytics company to come in behind me and tell me I have a problem. That's way too late. I want to know right now. I want my service tickets or my work orders to be generated on real time. I want my equipment to be rated. I want my floors to be rated by productivity. I want to be able to set priorities by these ratings. And so going forward, so IT has kind of been a blessing because I can't keep moving towards other things. I have to actually look at what I have and actually grow it to the fullest. Mm-hmm. And that's actually been a stretch for all of us. I mean, because I come in and, just last week I came in and I told
Cody, which is one of their technicians, I said, look, I want to be able to rewrite our alarms. And I said, and I want to be able to take some of our alarming and I want to make it into questions because I actually wanted to see how we can fold GPT into this. And I want to see if that'll actually help do troubleshooting for my technicians. Because already my systems are telling them what part of the systems is not running optimally, but I want actually to incorporate more AI into my systems. You know, right now I'm working with a company called Space Intel that they're going to have to help me get through IT with this because I want to do virtual reality. And I want to be able to actually train my technicians or to have my contractors be able to use the virtual reality. So for example, let's say that I have, you know, my tag schedule and my tag schedule says tag 54 and it kind of gives me a description of the tag and it gives me a general location. Well, now if I tell a technician that you need to go close tag 54, he walks around and or she and they can't find it. Well, I can go into the virtual reality system, click on that. It'll take me right to the area where tag 54 is. I can look up and see it. Inside the system, I can show a technician and they can go.
So are you guys developing customizable dashboards for things like that?
This is what we're in the process of actually working with right now to work with this software system to bring it into Niagara. Also, the neat part about that is it's going to bring me asset management. It's going to bring me a CMMS. So, for example, let's say that my facility manager is walking in the space, and they see a scratch on the wall. Well, my wall pane is already tagged with a Sherwin-Williams color. I can actually get into virtual reality, tag the area of the wall that has actually been scratched. That'll automatically send a work order to the painters. The painter can then get into the work order, click in the virtual reality scan, look at the wall, see that it's the Sherwin-Williams color, and go. And then he can also, you know, with the Matterport, since this is built on top of Matterport, he can actually even scale out the wall to know how much paint he needs to paint from corner to corner. So I'm already getting faster and faster and faster if this technology actually that we're doing works out for us. But once again, if I don't have them, I can't get through this with IT. So they're really actually everything I want. I actually have to rely on them to actually get it for me.
Wow.
But these are the kind of things the initiatives that we're piloting with customers, and we're constantly working with Cochrane Supply. We have a very close connection with them, and you know, almost immediately when any new product comes out, my rep brings it to me, and we look at it and start to evaluate whether it does or doesn't fit in the picture. And you know, Kristen and I'll usually have a chat about it, and sometimes she'll bring it to me, and sometimes I'll bring it to her, and then you know, we'll evaluate whether the business needs to go further in working with it or not, and if there's a real world use for the product that customers would have where it's going to enhance their ability to run their enterprise. And that's really, again, as Andre stated earlier, we are that advocate for the customer. We sit on their side of the table, and so we don't want to bring technology to somebody just for the sake of bringing technology. But if it brings a real world value to that customer, then that's an essential product that we have to collectively evaluate and make decisions on.
I can tell you that if you actually go to IT and say, look, I know that you got your Wi-Fi network set up, and I want to know all the devices that are on this floor that are hooked up right now, and I want you to make me a heat map. Here's my 3D floor plan. Please make me a heat map, and then tell them why you're using it, so I can understand the use of my floor, the loading on my floor. Let's say that I put in, you know, with this new work from home, you know, come in to collaborate, then go back home. You know, we're constantly struggling on what furniture is everybody going to use. What's the type of collaboration tools that our associates need? Because everything at Nationwide is about the associate experience. That is 100%. It is basically the tail wags the dog at Nationwide. I'm going to tell you that right now. So the customer is very spoiled, and they expect certain furniture. Well, I don't know what furniture that we put in the space is actually working properly unless I actually sit up there or you know, watch, because I'm not allowed putting cameras in the space. So if I used the IT network, I can actually see the areas that they're actually coming to on my 3D floor plans, and I can actually see what systems are getting used. Plus, I know, okay, this area, the carpet's going to be more worn, the paint's going to be more worn over here. I mean, there's so many things that we can pull into our actual systems that these guys have laid the groundwork for me. Now, it's just, what can I dream up?
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece of it, is it's not just about what the business managers want to do. It's about what's valuable to the entire team. You're using it at a technician level, you're using it at a management level, you're using it at a, ownership level to ensure that the buildings are being utilized to their best ability. But it's not just about utilizing the buildings, it's about how you're managing those buildings and how the technicians are being involved as well. So looking at it, you have to involve, now with the new generation, how are you going to teach them? Some folks you're bringing in from a labor aspect that don't have experience. How do you build that in? The technology is there, you can do a lot with it. Now it's the role of the MSI to kind of look at it and say, how can we help them in all aspects? Not just making sure the equipment is running, but training their staff and supporting their staff, letting them use it as a tool to ensure that the buildings maintain the way they're designed or the way they need to run them, because the space occupation has changed in a lot of buildings. So you have to evolve with the way the utilization is being performed in the buildings as well. So having the MSI in there, constantly conversing with multiple parties across different levels, provides that opportunity to bring new ideas to the table that then entails with the technology, and you can bring it all to the table at a forefront to say, this is where we need to go with it. This is how we develop it. It's not just about just slapping new controls in every building. Sometimes you got to utilize what's there to the next level.
Right. That kind of dovetails into my next question. That's a perfect segue. And this is for both Russ and Andre, and I'll start with you, Russ. Like, what is the new era of building technology? All this technology we're hearing about, all the AI and the IP devices, blah, blah, blah. What does that look like for the MSI moving forward as far as their capabilities and some of the things that Kristen just talked about? Like, as an owner and an end user, what does that do for your expectations for an MSI?
That's a tough question. So I guess my expectation would be
from a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, 30,000 foot view is they're going to have to keep up to date on everything, right? So they're going to have to be current with market trends, technology that's out there. They're going to also need to do what Bedrock does internally as our own MSI and vet out products and find products that actually work and not present products to their client base that may be a failure. So I think MSIs they have a huge role in the industry, right? So if you have a company unlike Bedrock where we have our own internal teams that do our own management like that, you rely on MSI for everything, right? You rely on them to make sure your standards are being met. You rely on them to make sure the installations are proper, the commissioning is proper, programming is working, right? So I think at a 30,000 foot view of MSI in the future, they're just going to have to be on top of market trends and technology, right? They're going to be all over it.
Great. How about you,
I think they have a big responsibility because they're, since our technology is changing so fast, they're having to actually, jump on a new technology, try to learn it as fast as possible, because I'm going to come to them and go, well, what do you think about this? What's this idea? Can we do this? I'm constantly calling them up and going, okay, I have this idea. Do you have any information about this? And I can hear Tim go,
Yeah, our team loves Jimmy.
Yeah.
Because what he does is he challenges us to grow outside of our comfort zone, right?
Curveballs and sliders.
So he's constantly pushing the envelope, which is great. I mean, you can't ask for a better customer than to do that, because as we, what do you say? Steel sharpens steel, and people sharpen people. Yeah. Very true statement. So as they challenge us to think outside of the box and explore the world of possibilities, we just get better as a team. So it's great from a collaborative standpoint.
Just to piggyback off of what Russ was saying, from a global standpoint, and Kristen actually said it best, we're looking at spaces now. We're looking at building utilization. If you go backwards, when we were talking master systems integration, it was all HVAC.
Right.
So the biggest thing now that we're seeing is this evolution, the dawn of a new era, right? I mean, that's the title of this whole segment. From an ownership standpoint in a business, our job is to train our team. We have to constantly train our team, and you know, our team is trained from R2 to AX to N4 to advanced N4. But the big thing, and we've taken steps from a cyber standpoint, right? We've recently joined some organizations, but I think the key to success is always to stay cutting edge. The other thing is, how do you find talent to help support people like Bedrock, to support Nationwide? And the one way that I've taken an approach to it that we collectively have is exposure. And I kind of led to it when I was first thinking Scott Cochrane when we first sat down. It's the exposure to our industry. You don't learn this in college. There's no course for this. So getting out, spreading the word, having these types of events to go back and tell people, not only can you have a productive career, right? It's exciting. Look behind us, right? The Hudson site is going up. Whoever planned that, that was phenomenal. That is really where, from a global standpoint, we're looking. How do you keep training? How do you keep your staff up to speed? When you've got really good customers like Jim Birch who are constantly calling, our job is not always to be the expert, because you can't be all things to all people, but as long as you can direct, be knowledgeable about topics, and there are instances, Jim, where we might know a little bit more than you sometimes, not a lot, right? But he does. He keeps us on our toes, and there are other customers just like him that do the same thing. So I think it goes back to, again, exposure. From a global standpoint, we always want to just constantly keep our team so trained that they can always be valuable to someone else. And that's what I really appreciated about what Russ was saying.
Well, we're running out of time here. You guys have any questions for our group up here? Did we wear you out? Information overload?
I think everybody's anxious to get to lunch there.
Yeah, I know.
Easy that one.
Don't stand between this group and food.
Right.
So, what's the role of the MSI and not just thinking about technology and integration, but bringing ideas like, one of the key things we're focused on is driving new streams of revenue using our technology investments. And whether that's, hey, going to a tenant and say, hey, I can put a meter in your space and save you $500 a month. You pay me $100 a month, and now I've got a new business, right? Or another thing is I want to get completely away from anything scheduled on my BMS, right? I want my buildings to tell me when something needs to be done, like the filter changed, or I don't need to turn the lights on because there's no one there, stuff like that. What do you see as the role of the MSI in being proactive about bringing those kind of ideas and really, adding value to the organizations they serve?
So, can I take a step?
Yeah, please.
So, I think, again, when we go back to this thought process of, I can't speak for other MSIs. Other MSIs are generated and created under a different set of circumstances. Because we are engineers first, and because we have this exposure to this public and private sector, we touch healthcare, we touch high rises, we touch K-12, higher education. I think that think tank comes back, and to your point, all of those different building utilizations allow us to be able to have intelligent conversations with you about what your question was, right? So we can bring those ideas. That goes back to the last question of, you have to remain cutting edge. You have to be able to pivot, right? And again, we collectively take all of those experiences from all of those different end users. You kind of put them all on a whiteboard, and you filter through what works and what doesn't work. But that's the flexibility that we try to maintain to be the best MSI we can be.
Trusted advisor.
Well, and it's all about being good listeners too, because understanding what your customers need and what their challenges are. So being a large property manager, carbon footprint and ESG is critical. That's the buzzword that everybody is trying to deal with right now, and coming up with innovative ways to address those concerns and shrink a business's carbon footprint is absolutely critical.
And that's kind of funny you asked that, because we have Blue Ridge lighting system in our facilities. And I didn't want any more schedules. So I came to them and said, look, I want a normal mode and I want a walkthrough mode. Now, Blue Ridge doesn't give you that capability, but if you put the Niagara system on top of it, then you can do that. So basically I said, okay, these are the parameters I want. This is when I want to go in and out. And I walked out of the office and those guys, you could tell, go, okay. And, and it's the group, not these guys, but the group that I work with, in Columbus. And I came back the next day and they said, well, Jim, what do you think about this? And it was done. So we piloted the program and it's technology I didn't have to go back to IT for. We have it in the system. So then I said, okay, well, that works so well. Now I want to actually do occupied setback using my lighting system. So then we started putting that in. And what this does is this dialogue with them opens up their creativity too, because, I told them, I said, look, I'm leaning on you guys. I want to, I'm thinking of all these things that to make us better. I want to know what you guys think. And then you also have to harness me, because I'm going to run off the rails if you don't pull me back in, So, and I think that's what they're really good at is kind of going, no.
And the other thing is you have to strike a balance too, because technology for the company, for Nationwide as a corporation, is a great thing, right? And you can make your buildings so they're completely automatic, but you also have to remember that they have a legacy staff of building engineers that have been maintaining and running these buildings, and they've been running them by twisting knobs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, oversimplification, but, when it gets to this temperature outside and this humidity, I turn the chiller set point down. Why? Isn't the term automation, doesn't that imply that things are done automatically, right? I mean, we don't have operators running around building. The days of a chain and a valve are long past, right, folks? But that's the challenge that we rub up against because Nationwide is not only all about the associate experience, but the people that maintain these buildings are associates as well. So we've had to do things like put in alarming and trending for when operators go in and override the system automatically, because that's important information to have if you're a building owner, right? And to their credit, from the start of this journey to now, they've reduced their carbon footprint as a corporation over 40%, and this is documented. And this journey has only just begun. But Nationwide is trying very progressively to be an environmentally conscious steward, and certainly their social and governance policies are well known as well.
Well, and then also, I've not just asked them to be my MSI, I've asked them to be replaceable. So when we actually set up these diagnostics, I won't let them do anything that I can't have another company come in right behind them and do. I refuse to be, as much as I like them, I refuse to be locked into one person. And they've actually really actually grasped that whole entire process. It's like, keep it simple, stupid. And that's everything that we put together. And I told them that if you make it so difficult that nobody can come in and replace you, the only thing I got is a proprietary system. And I said, and that's the reason why I went Niagara. I don't want that. So I actually get back into their systems and look and see what their diagrams look like. I look at their programming. I go through all their programming, and I'm like, no, I don't like that. No. And that makes us a really good team. But it also they know that they can be replaced. And as much as I love them dearly, they're like family. Business is business.
Keeps us honest.
But most companies would have looked at me and said, nope, we ain't doing that. We're going to try our own thing. We're trying to get your claws in you. And what really honestly, they've just said, look, we'll just prove to you that we're the best for you. They might not be the best for everybody, but they're best for you every day. And that's what they do every day. And that's the reason why I really appreciate working with them, because it is a family at the end. I mean, we're trying to take this path moving forward, and it takes friendship and everything to do that.
Yeah, and the irony is because they're open and understand they can be replaced, they're making it so that you want.
Right.
Yeah, we build
Well
those
said.
relationships to make sure you want to stay with us.
I think we've got one more question there.
Yes, thanks for the discussion so far today. I'm curious from a design perspective of your customer base, how many projects, maybe rough percentage-wise, that you're actually designing as non-siloed, multidisciplinary spaces? Or maybe another way to describe it is according to more the room automation platform, where instead of devices controlling a thing, devices control spaces. What percentage of that, are you into that sphere yet, or is that something?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I totally understand the question. I apologize. Maybe I'm being a little thick today. But
I'm on the same page as
So
well.
out of Europe, there's a standard VDI 3813 that's pretty long standing, and what it is devices that control spaces. So if in the space there is a controller that controls areas or segments and whatnot, and then from that, things more directly report. So you have, for example, a lighting sensor, and if you're HVAC and the controller is controlling space, you can directly attach that rather than siloed controls where you have a bunch of middleware or access boxes. And the question is, and I think it's not yet, are you proceeding into where you do more multidisciplinary type systems?
yeah, and actually we do quite a bit of that right now with Nationwide. But as a percentage of our business, you have to look at private segment versus public segment is a lot different. So public segment, I know we're sitting in Michigan, but we do a lot of work in Ohio, and you've got the Ohio Schools Facility Commission, and they have design manuals that they publish, and it's very specific. So you have some options in terms of doing spaces instead of devices, for lack of a better term. But in the private segment, when you're dealing with somebody like Nationwide, it's all about having all that equipment coordinated and functionally operating a space as a unitary structure, if that makes sense. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I'd like to thank AGM for joining us today. I really appreciate your input. Great stuff. And Russ, thank you again for sticking around.
Yes, thank you, Russ.
Appreciate
Really
it.
appreciate it.
And we're going to wrap up here shortly, but what I'd like to do is see if anyone from the audience would like to share a takeaway from today's presentation. Don't be shy. The door's locked until we get at least two. So you can't get to your food. But does anyone have any takeaways from the 4 hours? Okay, Teresa?
I think one of my favorite quotes was from Kristen, where she said that clients aren't necessarily open to the next new thing, that it's using the technology they have to the fullest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the times we've just entered, that's really true. So that's one of my takeaways I wrote down.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Anyone else?
I don't have a takeaway, but it's more of a discussion about recruiting. I'm really new to the industry, almost, and I'm a graphic designer and marketing. But a big theme coming out of this week is going to be how we're going to recruit in this industry young talent. And you guys touched on it, but I don't know if there's an answer.
So do you mind if I?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Andre, please.
So, and before we leave, I do want to thank each and every one of you for participating and listening. It's so cool when you actually have a group of people who's interested in what you have to say. But to your point, one of the things we've done, and I hope I'm not giving secrets away, we've started a progressive internship opportunity, right? And you go to the local colleges and universities, and my alma mater is University of Toledo, so we have a phenomenal relationship there. In fact, 3 of us up here, UT grads. You go there and you start to educate them on what it is this industry looks like. And then when they do have people that are coming through, students that are coming through, you have an opportunity to not only expose them to what we do, but you can also bring them and give them an opportunity to see hands-on experience within your organization to see if it's something they want to kind of move towards. So there's no right answer. There's only options, right? But we're doing our best to find a way to give that additional level of exposure, because I love to hear your story. That's phenomenal.
So here's another thing real quick. What we actually started doing at Nationwide is we actually started, when you hover over any point on my graphic, it'll do a pop-up, and that pop-up will give you a paragraph or less, basically explanation of what that point does in the system. Because what I found out is that people won't read a whole entire sequence of operation. They'll do chunking. So as long as you can actually make this chunking, and actually Karina, my wife right there, she is actually going through this as a maintenance tech. She was a chef 3 years ago, and now she's actually learning how to program and everything else. And this is one of the big things that's helped her, is actually go through and actually do all the chunking, and it's information at the fingertips. So how you're actually putting your documents into the Niagara system, so your technicians don't have to leave; they can be right there. All these things, I think, are going to help bring and train people faster. And I think that VR, what I was talking about earlier, is actually going to make that even faster.
And then to pay a little deference to our host, one of the things that Scott Cochrane has done for as long as I can remember, and I worked at Cochrane Supply for 12 years, and before that at Honeywell, but I've known Scott a long time, probably about 19 years now, and he's been very progressive in recruiting talent. Kristen Scheidler is actually a byproduct of one of Scott's seating experiences, where he took 20 IT students and out of the industry and said, well, I'm going to roll the dice and I'm going to sponsor them for Niagara CERT training. And she was the only seed that actually took and grew. Wow. But it was awesome. And Scott does a Padawan training. They call it Padawan after Star Wars. But he does this training for all of the personnel that he hires. So it doesn't matter whether you're HR or you're working for Mike Mitchell developing the latest software solution. He makes everybody go through it, and it's learning the industry. And part of that is paying homage to our mentors. So Scott and I, when we grew up in the industry, we had Don Sr., his dad, and we had Norm Miller, who had worked at both Robert Shaw and Honeywell. So he and I have that in common. But we had these great mentors that would sit there and tell you that it's a mixing valve applied for diverting service. It's not a diverting valve, right? So Cochrane has been so very progressive in doing that, and we've tried to do the same thing as an organization with our internship program, and we've brought on a lot of bright young talent that would have never touched this industry. 50% of our engineers are computer science engineering.
Oh, nice.
And so it's introducing them to this industry. A mechanical engineer, this industry is kind of familiar, or an electrical engineer like me, it's okay, you kind of get it. But you take somebody from computer science engineering and say, here's how you cool a building. There's this thing called a chiller. What?
Right.
Why do you need that? So
yeah, no, I get it. Any other takeaways from the last 4 hours?
Cyber harmony. Thank you.
Spread the word. Spread the word.
And the fact that we're still discussing IT and OT and this whole, we were talking about this 10, 15 years ago,
right,
being the bridge to bring those organizations together. And we're still talking about it today.
Yes.
But cyber harmony, I love it. Love it.
Yeah, thank you.
Also one more thing about cyber. So if you got a combined system like mine, which is OT and IT put together, when your IT department decides what they're going to do with their cybersecurity and what measures they're going to take, you have to be working hand in hand with them, because if they shut something down, they shut your whole building down, and they don't care about you. They don't care about how your buildings work. So if their protocol was to shut these switches down, and your chillers are on that switch, you're running around like, what's going on? And then so you really have to be hand in hand with your IT department, one cybersecurity, if you're a blended network.
Yeah.
So I know they talked about with the OT network, but for me, we really have to understand what's going on. And then, you got to love the Java updates and everything that takes my systems right offline.
Well, and the key to what Jim is saying is it cannot be an adversarial relationship.
No.
If you don't make OT or IT your best friend, you've missed the boat in today's building environment.
Okay, one more takeaway from the last 4 hours. Colin?
To say very briefly, I was very surprised to see Bedrock move their front end to the cloud there. I had never really thought of that for a mainstream there, so I got to take a deeper look at that, I think. And
there you go.
Well, and that begs a question that I had actually earlier, Russ, that I didn't bother you with, but severability. So I know as a property manager, you're in the business of acquiring and then occupying, having tenants occupy buildings. But with the front end in the cloud, on the occasion that you have an opportunity to sell a building, how are you handling severability where all of a sudden this building's going to get turned over to an independent owner that won't be on that network or cloud, or have you not encountered that yet?
It's a good question. So all of our buildings they're open, but the infrastructure is resident in the building, right? So we have the Bedrock BMS, the Niagara infrastructure and all that stuff, right? So if we were to sever that site, let's say, from the cloud, from the connection, that building could run siloed on its own with its own independent schedules and everything like that. So we have our buildings, we have the redundancy in those to where that happens in case we lose a fiber connection in the street, or we're severed from the cloud for, a short period of time, those buildings can run. Bedrock typically, because we're not a property manager, we're a real estate development firm, so we buy property and we own property, and most of our clients are FOC family companies. So that has not been an instance I've had to deal with yet where we're actually selling a property that we've invested and integrated in. We haven't done that yet, but it could be done, yes, it could. No, we just buy.
Mine.
They bought an entire Detroit.
And so for the redundancy aspect, do you use like an on-premise supervisor as a
Nope.
as a
I was
backup?
going to ask that.
No, so if the site goes down, it'll stay running on its own independently, and my team can just roll out to the site with laptops and fix anything we need to do. But we've only had one instance where we had a site down more than a day, and it was a fiber strand cut in the street, but we temporarily got another access point in, so.
Gotcha.
Okay, guys, look, we've gone 20 minutes into your lunch period. I really, really do appreciate you guys spending the last 4 hours of your day with us. Hopefully this was educational, informational. Like I said, I left my business card there that has a QR code to smartbuildingdesign.com. Please reach out to me if you have any suggestions for our website. Reach out to me if you need assistance with designing systems. And with that being said, thank you very much. Slow clap.